Let's journey to a lost world, to the era known as the Jurassic Period. Imagine a planet shrouded in dense forests where the air is humid and warm, and giant lizards are the undisputed masters of every patch of land and every body of water. What made this time so special? And why did true titans appear on Earth then, the likes of which the planet had never seen before or since? In this story, we will reveal all the secrets of that distant era. So let's fast forward hundreds of millions of years into the past. The atmosphere of the Jurassic Period was radically different from our own. The planet was a veritable greenhouse. Carbon dioxide levels in the air were several times higher than today, creating a powerful greenhouse effect. The climate was so warm that polar ice caps simply didn't exist, and sea levels paradoxically were significantly lower than today. How did scientists know this? The answers are locked in stone. Isotopes, these chemical fingerprints of time, frozen in ancient carbonate rocks, serve as a kind of natural thermometer. By analyzing them, paleoclimatologists see that even at high latitudes, where eternal ice now lies, warm water once swam. The geological layers of that time show no hint of glacial deposits, no boulders carried by advancing glaciers. The climate wasn't just warm, it was remarkably stable, without the sharp and destructive fluctuations that plagued the planet in previous eras. Air saturated with greenhouse gases trapped the sun's heat, triggering circulation mechanisms in the oceans and atmosphere that differed from those of today. Geologists, like detectives of the past, are studying rock strata. They have discovered that the oxygen isotope ratios in marine fossils, such as those found in ancient mollusk shells, directly indicate extremely high water temperatures, even near the ancient poles. The sediments of these regions are completely devoid of any traces of debris that could have been transported by ice. This is irrefutable evidence that snow and ice played no significant role in shaping the landscapes of that time. Instead of glaciers, giant rivers and shallow seas shaped the planet. These rivers flowed widely across the continents, carrying tons of sediment and creating the thick sandstone deposits we find today. Another piece of evidence is the fossilized leaves of ancient plants. They can tell us about the chemical composition of the atmosphere better than any instrument. On the surface of each leaf are tiny pores called stomata. Their density is directly related to the concentration of carbon dioxide in the air. Jurassic plant leaves have a very low density of these pores. This means that carbon dioxide was so abundant that plants didn't need to open many windows to breathe. Using these simple patterns imprinted in fossilized tissue, scientists can reconstruct the atmosphere of the lost world with astonishing accuracy. This warm and humid climate, of course, also influenced precipitation. Computer models and geological data paint a picture of powerful monsoon rains that lashed the interiors of the continents. This created vast seasonal floodplains, ideal pastures where dinosaurs thrived. These climatic rhythms left their mark on the geological record in the form of alternating layers of mud, red rocks, and fossilized soils, which testify to cycles of drying and re-wetting. This entire unique climate system was supported by three pillars: high CO2 levels, persistent volcanic activity, and powerful rock weathering processes. The sun shone just as it does today, but its rays passed through a completely different air filter. The sky was often covered with a light haze, and the air was thick and humid, split apart. This process was accompanied by monstrous volcanic activity. The Earth literally breathed fire. Volcanoes emitted colossal volumes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, intensifying the greenhouse effect. Giant rift valleys, harbingers of future oceans, filled with molten lava flows and lakes, which left their chemical traces in the atmosphere. Volcanic provinces, such as the Central Atlantic Igneous Province, had a colossal impact on the air chemistry of that era. But gases weren't only emitted on land. Mid-ocean ridges on the seafloor were also sources of greenhouse gases. This led to a gradual rise in sea level and the flooding of vast coastal areas. Giant carbonate platforms sprawled across shallow, warm waters, providing homes for reefs built by coral-like organisms and sponges. These warm seas were both a result and an indicator of global climate change. By measuring strontium isotopes in marine fossils, researchers can track the rate of seafloor spreading and the intensity of rock weathering, which is directly related to the balance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Warmth permeated everywhere. In regions that are now lifeless deserts, Jurassic deposits preserve petrified wood, dinosaur footprints, and remnants of soils where vegetation once thrived. These lands weren't dead. On the contrary, they were teeming with life, covered with forests and rivers. The climate here was semi-arid, but much warmer and wetter than in modern deserts. Fossil pollen found in these rocks testifies to an incredible diversity of flora, including conifers, cycads, and ferns. Even in polar regions like modern-day Antarctica, fossils have been found that paint a picture of dense forests of ginkgo and conifers, without the slightest sign of prolonged freezing. The absence of permanent ice sheets at the poles also meant different sea level dynamics. Fluctuations were far less significant than during the ice ages, and were driven primarily by slow tectonic shifts and sediment accumulation, rather than by the melting and refreezing of giant glaciers. This led to a slow but constant shift in coastlines, leaving behind extensive deposits of shallow marine rock. These layers are now literally packed with fossils of ammonites and belemnites, extinct cephalopods that serve as key markers for dating the Jurassic Period. This stable and warm climate had colossal consequences for the evolution of life. It was a true golden age for ecosystems. Plants could grow virtually year-round, providing an inexhaustible food source for giant herbivorous dinosaurs. Rivers flowed across the endless plains, creating ideal conditions for nests and broods. It was this constant abundance of vegetation and water that provided the environment for the evolution of giant sauropods, living mountains of flesh and bone whose enormous bodies required constant nourishment. Climate even influenced soil chemistry. Warm weather conditions and heavy rainfall in many regions accelerated the chemical weathering of rocks. This process, oddly enough, served as a counterweight to volcanism. Chemical reactions absorbed a certain amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, creating a slow but reliable balancing mechanism. This great cycle of gas influx and expulsion maintained the atmosphere within stable, albeit very warm, limits, preventing the planet from overheating or cooling. The interaction of volcanism, weathering, organic carbon burial, and ocean chemistry formed a complex system of checks and balances that maintained ecosystem equilibrium. For millions of years, nature itself regulated greenhouse gas emissions, maintaining a balance that allowed life to thrive. During the Jurassic, this balance shifted toward warmer temperatures but remained within limits safe for complex life forms. Scientists can reconstruct these ancient processes by studying isotopic records, sedimentary rocks, and fossil distribution. And all this evidence points to the same picture, a world of warmth, stability, and a complete absence of major glaciations. Of course, the Jurassic climate was not completely static. There were wetter and drier periods, but it never reached the icy extremes characteristic of later eras. The quiet hum of the Earth system at that time is the rhythm of a giant greenhouse, slow and balanced, which shaped the face of life across the planet, from forests to the depths of the ocean. Now, let's enter the canopy of these ancient forests. Conifers and the unique ginkgo trees dominate here. Conifers are what are called gymnosperms, meaning their seeds weren't enclosed in juicy fruits, but ripened directly in the cones. Their needle or scale-like leaves were perfectly adapted for conserving moisture. These trees form tall, powerful trunks, creating a dense green canopy over the Jurassic landscape. Some species reached truly gigantic sizes, and their fossilized trunks, which we find today, are astounding. Ginkgo trees are another important component of this prehistoric forest. Their leaves had a distinctive fan-shaped form with radiating veins. Fossilized ginkgo leaves are so recognizable that paleontologists use them as a reliable reference point for identifying Jurassic rocks. Together, conifers and ginkgos formed dense forests that covered vast areas of the ancient continents of Laurasia and Gondwana, shaping the landmass. The canopy created by these trees regulated the amount of light reaching the ground, facilitating the development of entire layers of life beneath. Smaller plants thrived in the shadow of the giants. In clearings where the sun penetrated, dense undergrowth grew. Plant life flourished here. Fossils preserved everything for us: seeds, cones, leaves, and even bark imprints, which tell the story of how these ancient plants looked and functioned. Coal formed during the Jurassic period consists primarily of the remains of pine needles and ginkgo leaves, tightly compressed into dark layers of carbon. These deposits are direct evidence of the existence of vast forests that, like sponges, absorbed carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and stored it underground as peat and coal. The balance between photosynthesis and decomposition in these forests was central to the global carbon cycle. Imagine each fossil as a page from a long-lost book, telling us about the ancient world. By studying the arrangement of these pages, we can reconstruct a map of long-vanished oceans. This is precisely how paleontologists use ammonites. If a certain species of these creatures is found only in one ancient sea basin, it tells us about isolation, a kind of underwater kingdom cut off from the rest of the world. But when we find the same species on different continents, the picture changes. This is clear evidence that vast marine corridors ran between them, veritable superhighways for ancient life. This information is invaluable. It allows us to reconstruct the precise moments when these pathways opened and closed. At the very beginning of the Jurassic, many ammonite species were truly cosmopolitan, found all over the world. But time passed, the continents continued their slow drift, and by the end of the era, the oceans had separated. Unique, distinct faunas emerged, each with its own unique set of creatures reflecting the planet's new geography. Jurassic marine sediments are a veritable treasure trove for science. Thanks to the incredible abundance of fossils, we can peer into the most intimate details of the lives of ancient creatures. Take ammonite shells, for example. Like annual rings on a tree, they preserve the finest growth lines. They are silent witnesses to the changing seasons, telling us how this creature grew and developed. And the fossilized internal shells of belemnites, the so-called rostra, are truly natural thermometers. Oxygen isotopes are forever locked within their structure in the calcite itself, allowing scientists to determine with astonishing accuracy the temperature of the water in which this mollusk grew. These tiny chemical markers are direct and irrefutable proof that the climate in that distant era was incredibly warm. But it wasn't only mollusks that left traces. The skeletons of giant sea lizards, ichthyosaurs, preserve their own stories. Stories of struggle and survival. We find traces of healed fractures and signs of severe illness on their bones. This suggests that even after severe injuries, some of these sea dragons manage to survive, heal their wounds, and live long lives. And inside the fossilized skeletons of their distant relatives, plesiosaurs paleontologists sometimes discover smooth stones known as gastroliths. These lizards likely swallowed them intentionally, using them as ballast to control buoyancy in the water or to grind food in their stomachs. Each such find is a small piece of a vast mosaic. Piecing them together, we reconstruct a stunningly detailed picture of life in the Jurassic seas. We see a complex balance of predators and prey, an incredible diversity of hunting strategies, an abundance of invertebrates, and majestic reef structures. All this paints the image of a dynamic and highly productive ecosystem. Each fossil is a piece of that world, forever frozen in layers of silt at the bottom of shallow seas, quiet lagoons, and the vast open ocean. The seemingly calm surface of the Jurassic waters concealed a world brimming with energy. A dolphin-like ichthyosaur pierces the water in pursuit of prey, leaving only ripples on the surface. And there, majestically gliding, long-necked plesiosaurs paddle with their powerful flippers, their silhouettes creating an unforgettable, almost mythical landscape. Thousands of ammonites, like living ornaments, drift passively in the warm currents, while beneath them, in the rays of the ancient sun, coral reefs slowly grow, millimeter by millimeter, adding even more color and life to the marine landscape. Their remains, layer by layer, accumulated on the seafloor, creating a stone record, a stratigraphic scale that scientists today read like a book, recreating the world of the Jurassic Period. Thus, the Jurassic Ocean was more than just a living ecosystem. It was a unique recording system where biology and geology intertwined, leaving their imprint on rocks for hundreds of millions of years. Among the countless invertebrates that rule the Jurassic seas, two stand out: ammonites and belemnites. They were not just key components of the ecosystem, but also time markers of sorts, living clocks of geological history. Ammonites are cephalopods enclosed in spiraling external shells. Imagine an underwater house divided into many chambers. The mollusk itself lived only in the last, largest chamber at the entrance, using all the previous chambers as a sophisticated buoyancy control control system, by adjusting the gas-to-liquid ratio in these chambers, it could rise or sink in the water column like a modern submarine. The line along which the internal partition is attached to the shell wall forms an incredibly complex fractal pattern. These patterns are so unique and different between species that they serve as a kind of fingerprint, allowing paleontologists to unmistakably identify which ammonite they're looking at. It is precisely this uniqueness that makes ammonites an invaluable tool. They allow scientists not only to identify species, but also to compare rock layers with pinpoint accuracy, even across different continents. These creatures evolved at breakneck speed and spread throughout the world's oceans. This makes them ideal indicator fossils, a kind of beacon that helps us navigate the Jurassic eras. Their remains are found everywhere, in Europe, Asia, and both Americas, allowing us to construct a unified global timeline. But ammonites weren't just time markers. They played a crucial role in ancient food webs. Their shells are so common in marine sediments that they sometimes form entire strata. And some of these shells bear the marks of violent events. They bear tooth marks and puncture wounds left by predators. These are evidence of attacks by fish, giant marine reptiles, or even other larger cephalopods. In extremely rare cases, we find not only the shell, but also soft tissue imprints, tentacles, and jaws. These unique fossils confirm that ammonites were active swimmers. Like modern squid, they propelled themselves by jet propulsion, forcing a stream of water through a specialized siphon. They seized prey with their tentacles and tore it apart with their powerful, parrot-like mouths. As we've already mentioned, their shells reveal growth lines that reveal secrets of their life cycle. Apparently, many ammonite species grew very quickly and reproduced in enormous numbers, relying not on longevity, but on numerous offspring. The shapes of their shells are astonishing, from tightly coiled discs to more open, loose spirals. Each shape is an adaptation to a specific lifestyle. Some were more streamlined, designed for high-speed swimming, while others were adapted to passively drifting in ocean currents. This diversity allowed them to occupy virtually every available ecological niche. Now let's move on to their relatives, the belemnites. Unlike ammonites, they possessed an internal skeleton. Most often, only one part of them is preserved, the durable calcite rostra. These bullet or cigar-shaped fossils are found in huge numbers in Jurassic rocks, sometimes even forming entire layers known as devil's fingers. Thanks to their density and chemical stability, these rostra are a veritable treasure trove of information. They tell us where and how these creatures lived. Belemnites were active predators, very similar to modern squid in both habits and appearance. Amazing finds have even preserved for us imprints of their hooked tentacles and ink sacs, exactly like those of their living descendants. Like ammonites, belemnites were an important part of the diet of marine giants, such as ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. Hundreds of tiny belemnite tentacle hooks are often found in the stomachs of these fossilized reptiles, revealing their place in the food chain. The isotopic composition of their rostra, as mentioned, is invaluable for paleoclimatologists. Oxygen trapped in calcite allows us to reconstruct the temperature of ancient seas. By analyzing the growth layers along the rostra, scientists can even trace seasonal temperature fluctuations in the Jurassic. climate during that era was generally warm and remarkably stable, with minor fluctuations likely caused by changes in ocean currents or bursts of volcanic activity. The abundance of both types of mollusks in ancient sea basins brings us back to geography. They are our guides to a lost world. For example, if the same ammonite species is found in both Europe and North America, this is irrefutable evidence of a direct sea route between these now separated continents. Conversely, if the fauna of the two regions differs dramatically, it means there was some barrier between them, land or shallow water. Such patterns help us map the world as it was hundreds of millions of years ago. Belemnites also exhibited a division into provinces, with certain species restricted to specific basins. This isolation only intensified as the supercontinent Pangea continued to break apart and new oceans expanded, forever separating once united populations. Ammonites play a key role in defining the boundaries of geological eras. Many stages of the Jurassic Period formally begin with the first appearance of a particular ammonite species in the fossil record. This allows for highly accurate correlations between continents. Belemnites, in turn, complement this picture, providing important data in areas where ammonites are less common. Together, they are indispensable tools for creating and refining the geological timescale. Sometimes, ammonite fossils are found not individually, but in entire clusters, with hundreds of shells lying in a single direction. This is a frozen image of a catastrophe, evidence of a mass extinction, perhaps caused by a powerful storm or a sharp drop in oxygen levels in the water. Other layers consist of shell fragments transported and ground by currents. Such deposits show us how biological and geological processes combine to create the rock record we study today. The size of these creatures varied enormously. Some species were no larger than a coin, just a few centimeters in diameter, but there were also true giants whose shells reached several meters in diameter. Just imagine an ammonite the size of a car tire. These leviathans, although rare, clearly demonstrate the evolutionary scope of this amazing group. Belemnites also exhibited a huge range of sizes, from miniatures a few centimeters long to massive rostra exceeding 20 centimeters. These variations reflect not only species differences, but also the ecological role they played in their ecosystems. Ammonites and belemnites were more than just an important part of the ancient world. They were living testaments to evolutionary experiments, their rapid diversification and extinction leaving an indelible mark on the history of life on Earth. Let's fast forward to the depths of the Jurassic Period, a time when the evolution of cephalopods, or cephalopods, unfolded at incredible speed. Imagine ancient continents slowly drifting apart, opening new sea corridors and creating gigantic, previously unseen ecosystems. And in these new worlds, cephalopods became true kings. Their robust shells and internal skeletons, known as rostra, proved incredibly durable. Thanks to this, the stone record of their lives, their rise and fall, is preserved in limestone shales stretching for thousands of kilometers across the globe. A breathtaking scene unfolds before us. Ancient oceans literally teem with the spiraling, twisting shells of ammonites. Sleek, bullet-like belemnites dart through these living clouds like ghostly torpedoes, drifting on warm currents. This underwater world seems almost serene. Schools of prehistoric fish shimmer in the water, but the calm is deceptive. At any moment, giant marine reptiles can emerge from the blue abyss, for whom all these small creatures are merely easy prey. And so, after each hunt, after each death, an invisible rain of remains slowly settles to the bottom. Sedimentary rocks, layer after layer, imperceptibly cover the bones of fish and reptiles, forever preserving not only common species, but also the rarest, unique details of their structure. This continuous accumulation took place over millions of years. Fossils were deposited in gigantic layers, creating a kind of geological archive. It is these archives that today allow scientists to reconstruct the oceans of the Jurassic era with astonishing accuracy. The story of ammonites and belemnites is more than just biology. It is a true geological saga written in stone. It tells the story of countless creatures that were born, fought for life, and died, becoming links in great food chains. They shaped the planet's climate and served as a kind of natural clock, measuring geological time. And today, their fossilized shells and rostra remain silent monuments of that era, shaping our modern understanding of the incredible world of the Jurassic period. But the oceans of the Jurassic era were famous for more than just their inhabitants. Unique reef systems flourished in the shallow waters, completely unlike what we see today. While modern reefs are the domain of scleractinian corals, their ancient ancestors were built by entirely different architects. The main builders of many Jurassic reefs were sponges, microbial mats, and calcareous deposits created by billions of tiny algae. These organisms, like living factories, secreted calcium carbonate, which, accumulating layer after layer, formed strong frameworks. Over time, these structures transformed into veritable underwater hills and entire platforms. While corals played a role in some places, they were far from always the primary architects. Fossil reefs discovered by paleontologists in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia have preserved these amazing features in exquisite detail, allowing us to peer into the past. These gigantic living structures, these carbonate platforms, arose along the margins of ancient continents, where warm, shallow seas inundated vast territories. Imagine ideal conditions: a mild, warm climate, high sea levels, and crystal clear water. Sunlight effortlessly penetrated the shallow water, providing energy for photosynthetic algae and symbiotic microbes. It was a true paradise for life, resulting in the formation of a thick layer of carbonate deposits. Over millions of years, these deposits were compressed into thick limestone layers, which we can still see today as majestic cliffs and entire mountain ranges. Within the reef itself, life teemed. An incredible diversity of organisms inhabited it, each finding its own way to establish itself in this underwater metropolis. Oysters clung tenaciously to the reef surface. Brachiopods clung to any hard protrusion. Crinoids, or sea lilies, used their feather-like arms to filter nutrients from the currents that washed over the reef. Ammonites and belemnites patrolled the surrounding waters like sentinels. Small fish and countless other inhabitants created a complex ecosystem. Every crevice, every cave of this living city hid a variety of invertebrates, but sponges occupied a special place among them. These amazing creatures weren't just inhabitants, they were the foundation. Fossilized sponge skeletons revealed their bizarre branching forms, which, like reinforcement, reliably held the entire reef structure together. Layered microbial structures called stromatolites can also be found nearby. They provide irrefutable evidence of the colossal role microorganisms played in binding sedimentary rocks. Essentially, reefs were true oases, centers of biodiversity where complex food chains thrived, from microbes at the bottom to giant marine reptiles at the top. But reefs were more than just home to countless species. They had a profound impact on the environment. Imagine ocean waves roaring against the outer wall of a reef. Behind this wall, quiet, protected lagoons form, where the smallest particles settle. These lagoons became ideal natural tombs, preserving incredibly fragile fossils, including entire fish and delicate invertebrates. It is thanks to these lagoons that scientists can now study our planet's past in such detail. And on the outer seaward side of the reef, at its base, debris accumulated, a kind of reef graveyard consisting of broken shells and skeletal fragments. These deposits, which geologists find in carbonate rocks, serve as a monument to the eternal cycle of life and death, reflecting the dynamic balance between living reefs and the processes of destruction. The growth of these underwater cities was closely linked to the vagaries of the environment. Any changes in sea level, salinity, or freshwater influx from land could dramatically impact the life of the reef community. In some geological sections, we see reef growth suddenly interrupted by thick layers of clay or sand, the remains of ancient rivers that brought tons of sediment from the continents, literally suffocating the reef. These catastrophes are visible in the geological record as alternating layers of sandstone and shale amidst pure reef limestone. But what's striking is that after such events, when conditions again became favorable, reef building resumed. This speaks to the incredible resilience and vitality of these ancient ecosystems. These reef systems serve as a kind of map of the ancient world for scientists. Their location along continental margins helps us pinpoint the locations of shallow waters millions of years ago, along which the shorelines of long-vanished seas ran. Because the organisms that built them were so demanding, their fossils help reconstruct the ancient marine environment. By studying their distribution, geologists can reconstruct fluctuations in sea level and even the outlines of ancient continents. But that's not all. The chemical composition of reef limestones themselves holds even more detailed information. Carbon and oxygen isotopes trapped within the stone can tell us about the composition and temperature of seawater from that era. And strontium isotopes allow us to track the speed of tectonic plate movement and the intensity of continental erosion. Taken together, these data paint a stunning picture. The Jurassic seas were warm and surprisingly stable, creating ideal conditions for these carbonate empires to thrive. Naturally, such oases of life could not help but attract large predators. Plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs constantly patrolled the reef edges, hunting fish and other creatures that gathered there in huge numbers. Even the sky wasn't safe. Pterosaurs, giant flying lizards, could swoop down from above, snatching prey straight from the calm waters of the lagoons. This abundance of life made the reefs veritable hubs of activity in the ancient world. Their fossils reveal not only the reef builders, carbon cycle. By absorbing calcium carbonate from the water to build their skeletons, they essentially acted as giant natural factories, removing carbon from the system for millions of years. The thick layers of Jurassic limestone we see today are enormous reservoirs of carbon, securely locked in solid rock. This process helped regulate atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, which in turn contributed to long-term climate stability. The fact that reefs thrived in the Jurassic greenhouse world clearly demonstrates how biological and geological processes interact to create balance in Earth systems. Moreover, Jurassic reef deposits contain evidence of ancient symbiosis. Fossilized corals sometimes preserve structures that hint at a mutually beneficial relationship with algae, similar to those we see today. This powerful alliance allowed the corals to obtain additional energy through photosynthesis and grow much faster. The sponges, in turn, also harbored entire microbial communities that aided their metabolism. Such findings demonstrate that complex ecological networks were well developed in the Jurassic seas. At that time, a huge variety of reef types existed. Some were small, isolated islands of life, just a few meters across. Others were gigantic barrier systems, veritable underwater walls stretching for tens, even hundreds of kilometers along continental shelves. The size and shape of each reef depended on local conditions, water depth, current strength, and tectonic activity. And fossils have preserved for us not only the remains of organisms, but also the very physical structure of these vast ecosystems. Reef limestones also contain invaluable microscopic information. These include microfossils such as foraminifera and calcareous algae. These tiny fossils play a key role in paleontological analysis. Their accumulations allow scientists to determine the precise depth, salinity, and even nutrient levels of the ancient ocean. Combined with larger fossils, they provide a complete, three-dimensional picture of Jurassic reef ecosystems. The stable and warm climate of that era facilitated their rapid growth. Unlike other periods marked by abrupt climate upheavals, Jurassic reef communities enjoyed long, thriving periods. This stability allowed for the accumulation of thick carbonate deposits, which today serve as invaluable archives of biodiversity and environmental conditions of the distant past. As we recreate those days, we can imagine these reefs as endless, sun-drenched underwater gardens where carbonate platforms rose from warm, shallow seas, creating a world brimming with life and harmony. Let's dive into the warm, crystal-clear waters of the ancient Jurassic seas. Before our eyes, we see not just underwater cliffs, but entire cities built by nature. These are majestic reefs whose rocky frameworks are completely covered in a living carpet of sponges, corals, and colorful algae. Here, in this underwater kingdom, life teems. Watch how the sea lilies, or crinoids, gracefully sway in the currents like exotic flowers on long stems. And nearby, clinging to the hard surface, brachiopods stand frozen in their sturdy shells. Ammonites float slowly in the water, their spiral shells shimmering in the sunlight, filtering through the surface. But this idyll is deceptive. Giant marine reptiles patrol the area tirelessly, ready to pounce on unsuspecting prey at any moment. And just above the surface, in the shallow lagoons, the shadows of pterosaurs, fearsome predators that terrorized all living things, glide. The sunlight penetrating these clear waters provided energy for photosynthesis, supporting the rapid growth and prosperity of this complex ecosystem. For millions of years, tiny particles settled in these tranquil bodies of water, burying layer after layer the remains of reef inhabitants. This slow and inexorable process preserved for us a stunningly detailed picture of ancient life. Today, these fossilized reefs are more than just rocks. They are a stone chronicle, capturing millions of years of ecological activity. They tell us the story of the astonishing diversity and complexity of ancient seas, the harmonious union of living organisms and their environments in that warm world that left behind only these majestic limestone relics. Now let's move on land to the very heart of the Jurassic continent. Here lie endless floodplains and lakes, nurturing a multitude of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. It is in their sediments that paleontologists find the most detailed and astonishing fossils of that era. Imagine giant rivers meandering their way across the land, flood zones formed along their courses, covered in wide stretches of sand and sticky mud. Each year, with the arrival of the rainy season, the rivers overflowed their banks, and powerful torrents of water brought in ever new layers of sediment, burying soil and vegetation. These cyclical processes created powerful geological strata, where layers of sandstone alternate with mudstone, each layer harboring its own paleontological treasures. This is clear evidence of the constant fluctuations in water levels. It is in these layers that we find dinosaur footprints frozen in stone, imprints of ancient plants, and even entire egg clutches. The fine-grained silt left behind after the water receded proved ideal for preserving the smallest details. Imprints of scaly skin, the finest veins on leaves, and even burrows dug by ancient invertebrates. In some deposits, we see evidence of repeated drying, the mud cracked under the scorching sun, with plant roots pushing through. This speaks to a sharp climate shift, an alternation of wet and dry seasons. These features indicate a typical monsoon climate, where torrential rains alternated with long periods of drought. The flora of these floodplains was incredibly rich. Mighty conifers grew here, palm-like cycads towered, and bonettites and ferns spread their leaves. Fossil pollen and spores extracted from these deposits allow us to reconstruct the local flora in detail, while petrified wood and leaf imprints paint a larger-scale picture of ancient forests. But the main masters of these lands were, of course, dinosaurs. They left countless tracks on the muddy surface left by floods. Sometimes these are the tracks of giant sauropods and ornithopods, moving in entire herds. These trails of tracks allow us to peer into the past and see how these giants moved and interacted with each other. Rivers were an integral part of their lives, a source of water and food. But alongside the tracks of herbivores, we often find other tracks, the three-toed footprints of predatory theropods. This proves that these deadly hunters followed their prey using the same trails. In some places, we see entire fields dotted with the intersecting tracks of dozens of different species, frozen moments of their daily lives along the banks of ancient rivers. Floodplains were not only feeding and watering places, but also maternity wards for new generations. Fossilized nests and entire clutches of eggs have been found in the sediments of these plains. In places like India and South America, paleontologists have discovered veritable nest cemeteries, suggesting that dinosaurs returned to nesting sites were crucial to the survival of the species. Sometimes, a sudden flood would cover them with a thick layer of silt, which, while burying the eggs, simultaneously preserved them for future generations of scientists. The arrangement of eggs within the nest, in circles or neat rows, tells us a great deal about the reproductive behavior of different dinosaur species. And sometimes, tiny remains of chicks are found alongside the eggs, a touching testimony that the babies remained in the nest for some time under the care of their parents before venturing out into the big, dangerous world. Jurassic lakes offer another window into a lost world. They formed in tectonic faults, on flooded plateaus, and in depressions in the Earth's crust. Their sediments are typically very fine-grained and consist of shales, mudstones, and carbonates that settle slowly in perfectly still water. This is why lake sediments preserve fossils with photographic precision. Complete fish skeletons, insect imprints with delicate wing patterns, and even fragments of soft tissue have been found in them. Some of these lakes were temporary. They filled with water during the rainy season and dried up completely during the drought. Evidence of their fragility is seen in the alternating layers of silt and salt crystals left behind after the water evaporated. Other lakes were permanent, and their deep waters eventually became anoxic. These conditions were harmful to living creatures, but ideal for preserving their remains. The low oxygen levels prevented putrefaction, allowing even the most fragile fossils to survive. The famous Zonhofen limestone in Germany is a perfect example of such an environment. Although it was more of a lagoon than a lake, the conditions there were similar. The fine carbonate mud served as a sarcophagus for a multitude of ancient creatures, preserving them in their pristine state. Pterosaurs, insects, fish, and even the legendary Archaeopteryx, the first bird to have a complete feather imprint, have been found here. Other Jurassic lakes, such as those in China, yield truly unique treasures: feathered dinosaurs, ancient amphibians, and plants that would otherwise have had no chance of fossilizing. These silent stones can tell us astonishing stories about past climates. Isotopic analysis of carbonate layers reveals temperature fluctuations and precipitation. And the organic matter preserved within them reveals the richness and diversity of vegetation around these ancient lakes. In some cases, the thin layers of sediment represent annual cycles, like rings on a tree. These layers, known as varves, act as a kind of stone calendar, allowing us to reconstruct the seasonal climate changes of the Jurassic period with incredible precision. Countless invertebrate fossils have been preserved in floodplain and lake sediments, shells of mollusks, snails, and of course, insects. Insect impressions on fine-grained mudstones are striking in their detail. Every vein is visible on the wings of ancient dragonflies and segments on the bodies of beetles. These finds prove that many modern insect groups were widespread and diverse even in the Jurassic. Their presence alongside fossilized plants and dinosaur tracks paints a picture of a tightly integrated terrestrial ecosystem. Fish fossils from the lakes are also striking in their diversity. They include both freshwater and marine species that swam into the lagoons. Their scales, teeth, and entire skeletons are preserved in exquisite detail. Amphibians and small reptiles are also found here, proving that life flourished beyond the ocean. Dinosaurs reigned supreme on land at that time. Fossils resembling crocodiles are often found in floodplains and near lakes, indicating the widespread distribution of semi-aquatic predatory reptiles. Their remains lie alongside those of plants and invertebrates, creating a complex picture of the ancient aquatic food web. In some floodplain areas where dense swamps absorbed dead plants, massive coal deposits formed over time. Jurassic coal seams contain the remains of ferns, cycads, and conifers. This suggests that wetlands were widespread along rivers and in lowlands. The combination of coal seams, fossilized soils, and traces of flooding provides a complete picture of how water, vegetation, and sediment interacted in the ancient world. Fossil soils, or paleosols, found in these deposits provide invaluable information about the climate and biogeochemical processes of the past. They contain traces of roots, fossilized nodules, and chemical markers that paint a picture of the climate and vegetation of bygone eras. Some sections clearly reveal carbonate spheres that could only have formed in a semi-arid climate. In other areas, we see traces of waterlogging. These contrasts reflect the enormous diversity of climatic conditions that existed in different parts of the Jurassic world. And of course, dinosaur tracks are a crucial source of information about their behavior. In some areas, paleontologists have discovered parallel tracks left by entire groups of sauropods. This is direct evidence of a herd lifestyle. In other areas, tracks from different species intersect, creating entire well-trodden paths like prehistoric highways. The distance between tracks and their depth allows scientists to calculate the speed and movement patterns of these giant animals. Sometimes, even furrows left on the surface by tails or paws help reconstruct their behavior in minute detail. Even skin impressions have been found in Jurassic sediments, giving us an incredible glimpse into what these creatures looked like. All these finds, tracks, bones, plants, are a crucial source of information about how terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems interacted. Plant debris washed into lakes became food for fish and invertebrates. In turn, these aquatic organisms became prey for terrestrial predators. It's not surprising that pterosaur fossils are sometimes found in lake sediments. Perhaps they hunted fish and inadvertently fell into the water, telling us their story millions of years later. Let's travel back millions of years to the shorelines of ancient Jurassic seas, where predators stalked their prey. Here, at the boundary between land and water, we see how closely all the planet's ecosystems were intertwined. These flooded plains and ancient lakes are a true treasure trove for paleontologists. Their sediments are a priceless record of the past. Unlike massive marine strata where only the bones of giants are preserved, here in the fine-grained mud and clay shales, time stood still. It was capable of preserving the most fragile and incredible details. The finest veins on a prehistoric leaf, the delicate, almost weightless feather of an ancient lizard, or the glass fragile wings of a giant dragonfly. These fossils are more than just rocks. They are direct, irrefutable evidence that allows us to peer into the eyes of a long-gone world, understanding its morphology and ecology. It is thanks to these unique deposits that we now know so much about life in the Jurassic period. Let's picture this scene in our imagination. distance, in silence and peace, serene lakes stretched out. Their dark green surface reflected the crowns of ancient conifers and dogwoods like a mirror. The shadows of fish glided beneath the surface, and myriads of insects soared above, with pterosaurs swooping down on them from the sky, slicing the air with leathery wings. When the turbulent currents calmed, the smallest particles settled to the bottom, layer after layer, burying everything that lived and died here. The water, like liquid amber, forever captured these moments, which millions of years later would turn into solid stone, preserving the amazing stories of the Jurassic Period. As the Jurassic Period deepened, a great geological drama unfolded on the planet. The supercontinent Pangea was bursting at the seams, breaking apart. Sea routes opened between the new continents, leading to the formation of unique, isolated worlds, so-called biogeographic provinces. Each became home to its own unique communities of animals and plants, evolving in isolation from one another. At the dawn of this era, many species, dinosaurs, marine reptiles, invertebrates, were distributed across the entire planet. They could be found in northern Laurasia and southern Gondwana. This cosmopolitan dispersal was possible thanks to land bridges and shallow seas, which allowed animals to roam freely across vast territories. However, the geological clock was ticking. The process known as rifting, in which the Earth's crust literally cracked and pulled apart, was gaining momentum. Ever wider and deeper sea barriers emerged between the continents, making free migrations virtually impossible. This great schism gave rise to that very provincialism. In isolated corners of the planet, unique species found nowhere else began to emerge. Fossil remains buried in the rocks of that time give us a unique opportunity to trace this process and understand how these isolated communities lived and evolved. The data speaks for itself. This trend is crystal clear. And here, ammonites come into play, true chronometers of prehistoric seas. In the early Jurassic, the shells of these cephalopods were virtually identical across Europe, North America, and even parts of Asia. This suggests that sea routes were open and waters circulated freely. But fast forward to the end of the Jurassic. The picture changes dramatically. Ammonite collections found in Europe differ strikingly from those paleontologists find in South America or India. This is direct evidence that exchange between these regions was extremely limited or completely ceased. Other marine mollusks were also divided into different provinces, with each species inhabiting its own limited basin. These patterns are like a map of the ancient world. They allow scientists to reconstruct sea routes and pinpoint exactly when insurmountable barriers between parts of the world arose. A similar story unfolded on land. Dinosaur ancestors displayed both common traits and striking differences across continents. For example, giant sauropods were found on virtually every continent, but their lineages varied wildly. North America and Europe were dominated by titans like Diplodocus and the mighty Brachiosaurus. Meanwhile, Africa and South America evolved their own giants, such as forms like Giraffatitan and other early titanosaurs. Spiked stegosaurus were common in northern Laurasia, but their remains are rare in southern Gondwana. Other groups of herbivorous dinosaurs also exhibit unique distribution patterns. All of these patterns reflect not only the ecological preferences of different species, but also the growing barriers created by inexorable plate tectonics. Predatory theropods were no exception. They diversified into regional groups, suggesting a complex and convoluted history of their development. Even fossilized footprints provide further compelling evidence of this biogeographical divide. In North America, ancient river floodplains are dotted with the footprints of large sauropods and theropods. But in Europe, we see a completely different picture. The footprints here are far more diverse, forming mixed assemblages that indicate a completely different species composition. The absence of certain groups in one region and their abundance in another is a clear marker of limited distribution and increasing isolation. As the continents continued their slow drift, even the silent world of plants told the same story of increasing provincialism. Conifers and ginkgos, with their unique properties, remained widespread across the planet, but they were represented by completely different species in different provinces. Analysis of ancient pollen confirms that regional plant communities became increasingly distinct as the continents drifted apart. In high-latitude regions, such as ancient Antarctica, fossil plants reveal unique combinations of species, perfectly adapted to harsh seasonal conditions. These floras were strikingly different from those that flourished in tropical equatorial zones. Such differences reflected both geographic separation and global climatic changes. Provincialism was also observed among the rulers of the ancient seas, marine reptiles. Groups such as ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs were distributed throughout the world's oceans, but individual genera inhabited only certain sea basins. For example, short-necked pliosaurs, ferocious marine predators, were represented by different species in Europe than in other regions of the planet. Unique forms have been discovered in South America, suggesting that marine barriers, perhaps currents or temperature fluctuations, limited gene flow between populations. Long-necked plesiosaurs also exhibited regional characteristics in skeletal structure and habitat. By studying these patterns, paleontologists, like detectives, can reconstruct how ocean circulation and the arrangement of continents shape marine ecosystems. But it wasn't just the physical barriers of land and water. Environmental changes also influenced the formation of unique worlds. When continents drift, the entire system of ocean currents changes, leading to global fluctuations in temperature and salinity. These changes create invisible ecological barriers, even if sea routes remain physically open. Fossil finds of ammonites and belemnites show that some species were extremely sensitive to such changes. They simply disappeared from regions when environmental conditions became unfavorable. This ecological sorting further exacerbated the differences between the faunas of different parts of the world. The presence of endemic species, those found only in one specific province, is a striking confirmation of this theory. Provinciality also plays a key role in modern geology, in what's known as stratigraphic planning. When a particular ammonite species is found only in one marine basin, it serves as a unique marker, a kind of geological fingerprint for that region. By comparing these endemic species with cosmopolitan ones found throughout the world, geologists can construct both local and global timescales. This dual system allows for the correlation of rock layers across different continents with incredible precision. The study of provincialism helps us peer into the very essence of evolutionary processes. Isolation is the forge of evolution. It forces populations to adapt to unique local conditions, leading to the emergence of new species. This is particularly evident in the rapid spread and diversification of certain dinosaur groups in Gondwana, where isolation from Laurasia facilitated the emergence of completely unique and sometimes bizarre forms. Similarly, marine fauna in isolated basins developed their own distinctive features over time. These processes ultimately led to the colossal diversity of life during the Jurassic Period. Evidence of this great drama of division survives to this day. It's not just fossils that bear witness, but also the sedimentary rocks themselves. As the continents drifted, new basins formed, each with its own unique sedimentation system. For example, rift valleys in Africa preserve the remains of fauna that are radically different from those found in the shallow marine sediments of Europe. Comparing these data clearly demonstrates how the planet's geography directly influences the formation of ecosystems. However, this isolation was not absolute. Some connections between these separated worlds still persisted. For example, the similarity of microscopic foraminifera between Europe and North America suggests that some intermittent marine connections did exist during the Jurassic. Furthermore, despite growing isolation, some cosmopolitan ammonite species managed to persist throughout the world. These examples demonstrate that barriers were not always insurmountable, and periodic dispersal of species did occur. And yet, the overall trend was inexorable. The world was becoming increasingly regional. By the end of the Jurassic, differences between the faunas of Laurasia, Gondwana, and other smaller land masses became apparent. This paved the way for even greater divergence in the following Cretaceous period. A majestic and tranquil picture unfolds before us, showing how gradual, almost imperceptible changes over tens of millions of years led to monumental consequences. The slow drift of continents altered migration routes and habitats, and fossils buried in geological layers like newsreels recorded these shifts step by step. Every ammonite shell, every dinosaur vertebra, every grain of pollen all contribute to the mosaic of growing provincialism. This process clearly demonstrates the profound connection between plate tectonics and biodiversity. Provincialism also directly impacted ecosystems, altering the relationships between predators and their prey. In regions dominated by certain herbivore species, predators were forced to adapt accordingly. For example, in Europe, where armored stegosaurs abounded, hunters had to develop entirely different strategies. Imagine two completely different worlds, separated by an invisible border. In the north of the planet, herds of ornithopods roamed, becoming prime prey for large predatory theropods. Meanwhile, in the south, in the so-called Gondwana, the landscape was completely different, dominated by colossal sauropods, veritable living mountains. This fundamental difference in the food web led to the formation of completely different predator communities on different continents, each with its own unique hunting strategy. It was precisely these ecological barriers that created the unique dynamics of life within each each of these isolated provinces. Geographic separation became a powerful driver of evolution. Trapped on giant island continents, ancient reptiles were forced to adapt. Here, in complete isolation, nature conducted its boldest experiments. New, sometimes bizarre, body plans emerged, and unique adaptations were honed. Some of these evolutionary innovations were so successful that they persisted for millions of years, while others vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the enigma of fossils. Thus, the astonishing diversity of life in the Jurassic Period is the result of two great forces: global warming, caused by the greenhouse effect, and regional isolation, which divided the world into unique biological kingdoms. And today, by studying the fossils preserved from those ancient times, we see reflections of both these forces, gaining an incredibly deep and multifaceted understanding of how life on our planet was organized. This process of dividing the world into distinct provinces was triggered by tectonic continental drift, which, in turn, generated new ocean currents, altered climate zones, and reshaped the entire ecological map of the world. We find evidence of this global restructuring everywhere. Fossil remains, be they ammonite shells, the remains of ancient marine animals, the distribution of dinosaur populations, the pollen of ancient plants, or the bones of marine reptiles. All of them, like pieces of a vast mosaic, fit together to form a single picture. These finds clearly demonstrate how a once unified world gradually fragmented into distinct ecological zones, each developing along its own unique path. The monumental processes that unfolded during that era left an indelible mark on rocks across all continents, allowing scientists today to decipher how life responded to these dramatic changes in the planet's geography. Now let's take a look into the invisible chemical laboratory of the Jurassic world, for it was precisely this laboratory that controlled everything. The fate of the planet depended on several key forces: the eternal dance of carbon in nature, the furious breath of volcanoes, the slow but inexorable erosion of mountains, and of course, the state of the vast oceans. Each of these processes acted as an invisible orchestrator, influencing the balance of gases in the atmosphere and the chemical composition of seawater, creating that famous hothouse climate of the Jurassic era. Volcanism was undoubtedly one of the most powerful sources of carbon dioxide. Imagine giant cracks opening in the Earth's crust as continents broke apart and new oceans were born between them. Volcanic activity raged everywhere, along mid-ocean ridges and in continental breaks, accompanied by the release of colossal quantities of gas into the atmosphere. We find evidence of this fiery era in the basaltic lava that flowed from these rifts. Tiny mineral-filled bubbles are preserved in the solidified flows, mute witnesses to the gases escaping from the planet's depths. Each such eruption triggered a dramatic change in the climate across the entire planet. Studies of fossilized plants, specifically the density of stomata on their leaves, confirm that during the Jurassic period, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations steadily increased. These processes created that warm and remarkably stable climate. But nature always strives for balance. Alongside volcanic activity, a reverse process, rock weathering, occurred in turn, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Imagine, every drop of rain falling from the sky absorbed carbon dioxide from the air, turning into a very weak acid. This acid, year after year, millennia after millennia, eroded the rocky cliffs, engaging in a chemical war with the minerals in the rocks. This silent war resulted in the formation of clays, and dissolved calcium was carried by rivers into the oceans. There, in the sea depths, calcium combined with carbonate ions, forming calcium carbonate, the building material for shells, skeletons, and ultimately limestone, which settled to the seafloor. This system acted like a giant natural thermostat, balancing the furious breath of volcanoes for millions of years. Traces of this monumental process are found today in the form of thick layers of clay-rich sediments left behind by intense chemical weathering. These geological records indicate profound changes in the bedrock caused by a warm climate and heavy rainfall. The warmer the climate, the faster the weathering, and the more carbon dioxide was removed from the atmosphere, preventing the planet from overheating. Another crucial element of the carbon cycle is the burial of organic matter. During river floods, tons of plant remains and dead plankton accumulated on vast plains, in quiet lakes, and in shallow seas. Gradually, they were buried under layers of silt and sand. When this organic matter did not fully decompose, but was preserved in sedimentary rocks, it was effectively removed from the short-term carbon cycle. Direct evidence of this process is provided by the thick coal seams we find in ancient flood zones and the layers of black shales formed on the seafloor. Jurassic coal seams contain countless remains of ferns, cycads, and conifers. And in the black shales, we find traces of ancient marine organisms, primarily plankton. Isotopic studies of these deposits allow us to peer into the past and see how carbon content has changed, directly reflecting the rate of its burial. During periods when organic matter was being buried in particularly large quantities, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels dropped slightly. But as soon as this process slowed, CO2 concentrations rose again. This dynamic balance, this eternal tug-of-war, had a decisive impact on climate stability. The chemical composition of ancient oceans is also recorded in rock. Strontium isotope ratios in marine carbonates can tell us about the rate of sea floor spreading and the intensity of continental weathering. When the ocean floor was actively spreading, more of one type of strontium was released from the Earth's mantle. And when weathering on land intensified, rivers brought more of another type of strontium into the ocean. Measurements taken in Jurassic limestones support both hypotheses. During this era, both the seafloor was actively forming and weathering was in full swing, which is perfectly consistent with our knowledge of tectonics and climate at the time. Climate conditions in those ancient times were strikingly different. By analyzing the oxygen isotope ratios in belemnite shells and other marine fossils, scientists can accurately determine the temperature of ancient seawater. These isotopic thermometers tell us that the oceans were very warm, with their temperature remaining virtually constant for millions of years. The absence of polar ice caps contributed to stable sea levels and a very smooth heat distribution across the planet. While different regions undoubtedly had their own climatic characteristics related to ocean currents, the overall picture was surprisingly uniform and warm. The most important carbon stores of that era were gigantic carbonate platforms and reefs. The thick Jurassic limestone layers we find today are nothing more than calcium carbonate deposits that formed over an unimaginably long period of time. These rocks are veritable graveyards of the ancient world, preserving the skeletons of sponges, corals, algae, and myriads of mollusk shells. By converting dissolved carbon into solid rock, these ecosystems reliably locked it away for millions of years, preventing it from re-entering the atmosphere. Their vast distribution across what is now Europe, the Middle East, and Asia testifies to the colossal scale of this process. It not only influenced carbon dioxide levels, but also created ideal conditions for a diverse range of marine life to thrive. Thus, the Jurassic carbon cycle is a complex mechanism, perfectly balanced between volcanic emissions, rock weathering, organic matter burial, and carbonate sediment formation. This system operated like clockwork for millions of years, with only minor fluctuations that can be traced through the isotopic record. For example, changes in carbon isotopes in marine sediments indicate periods when volcanoes respired slightly more actively or when organic matter burial accelerated at a rapid rate. However, all these fluctuations were minor compared to the dramatic climatic catastrophes of other eras. This speaks to the relative stability of the Jurassic greenhouse world. Trace elements such as molybdenum, uranium, and vanadium found in Jurassic sediments provide even more insight into how ancient ecosystems functioned. High concentrations of these elements in black shales indicate periods when the deep ocean was virtually oxygen-free. These anoxic conditions dramatically impacted the burial of organic matter and nutrient cycling. Naturally, this also impacted marine life. Low oxygen ecosystems severely limited the distribution of bottom-dwelling animals. The fossils we find in such sediments are often perfectly preserved, but species diversity is extremely low, reflecting stressful, almost unbearable conditions for life. Despite these localized death zones, however, the global system as a whole remained balanced, maintaining a warm climate favorable for the flourishing of life on the planet. The carbon cycle also tightly linked land and sea through river systems. Continental weathering supplied the oceans not only with building material for shells, but also with nutrients that served as food for plankton. And the rapid growth of plankton, in turn, contributed to even more intensive burial of organic carbon on the seafloor. Fossils of coccolithophores and other microscopic marine organisms help us unravel the mysteries of these ancient ecosystems and their complex interactions with the environment. Analysis of marine sediments containing dinoflagellate cysts reveals the incredible diversity of plankton in the Jurassic seas. The remains of these tiny organisms accumulated on the seafloor, forming fine carbonate oozes that eventually turned into chalk and limestone. This seemingly invisible process involving billions of microscopic shells played a key role in the global carbon cycle. And sometimes, in these same deposits, we find thin layers of volcanic ash, a kind of time marker that allows us to precisely date certain periodic events in the life of the ancient planet. Let's delve deep into the geological record of that distant era. Here, in the ancient layers of the Earth's crust, we find irrefutable evidence of the colossal eruptions that shook the Jurassic world. Before us are frozen evidence of fiery cataclysms, entire layers of volcanic glass, fused debris, and unique minerals ejected from the planet's scorching depths. And the most astonishing thing is that each such layer is a kind of natural clock. Using sophisticated radiometric analysis methods, paleontologists today can determine with incredible precision exactly when a particular catastrophe occurred. This astonishing glimpse into the past gives scientists the key to understanding global processes. As like detectives, they compare data. Here we see a peak in volcanic activity, and here, in the same geological layers, we record a sharp change in climate markers and the chemical balance of ancient oceans. The picture that emerges is frighteningly clear. Bursts of activity in the igneous mountains were directly linked to periods of global warming, albeit insignificant by the standards of the time. Unique fingerprints, carbon isotopes, whose ratios changed, revealing the presence of gigantic volumes of volcanic gases, were left in the chemical composition of the atmosphere and water. These geological records, frozen in stone, serve as a powerful reminder of how fragile and interconnected Earth's ancient climate system was. Volcanic eruptions directly influenced the temperature of the entire planet. But it wasn't only fiery catastrophes that wrote this history. The slow, almost imperceptible, yet inexorable carbon cycle also left its traces. Imagine a giant book, each page a separate geological layer. Here is a thick layer of limestone, formed from trillions of seashells. Here is a dark, dense layer of coal, all that remains of ancient forests buried beneath thick sediments. And here is a thin layer of shale, holding the secrets of the ancient seafloor. Each page tells us a chapter in the grand saga of carbon's journey across the planet. And by delving into these stone pages, analyzing isotopic composition, rare trace elements, and of course fossil remains of living organisms, science today is able to reconstruct this history in astonishing detail. And what do we see? The history of the Jurassic Period is, above all, a history of astonishing, almost perfect balance. It was a time of great equilibrium, when many global forces on the planet counterbalanced each other, creating a surprisingly stable and predictable world. Imagine a giant scale on a planetary scale. On one side, volcanoes constantly emitted carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, heating it. But on the other side, nature counterbalanced the scale. The weathering of rocks slowly but surely absorbed this gas directly from the air. Billions of tons of dead organic matter, ferns, trees, plankton, were buried at the bottom of swamps and oceans, reliably preserving carbon for millions of years. Enormous carbonate platforms built by marine organisms turned into limestone mountains, locking the carbon into stone. And great ocean currents, like the planet's circulatory system, carried heat and nutrients throughout the world, giving life to countless life forms. A key factor in this remarkable stability was the absence of ice caps at the poles. The world knew no sudden cold snaps or global glaciations, allowing ecosystems to develop without catastrophic disruption. From the vast coniferous forests covering the continents to the teeming coral reefs in the warm seas, everything lived and thrived in this harmonious world. Viewed from the perspective of geological time, the entire carbon cycle of the Jurassic Period can be compared to the steady, calm heartbeat of a gigantic living organism. And we find evidence of this rhythm everywhere. It's right before us, in the form of the remains of ancient conifers compressed into cold seams. It's in every layer of limestone, composed of countless ammonite shells, those spiraling rulers of the Jurassic seas, This evidence is even preserved in the isotopic composition of the rostrums of belemnites, ancient cephalopods. Every element of this gigantic system, from the volcano to the tiniest shell, made an invaluable contribution to the creation of a unique world, a greenhouse world, bathed in warmth, covered in lush vegetation, and filled with warm seas where life was in full swing. Let's fast forward to the Jurassic Period, an era when the world was completely different. The planet was buried in dense, endless forests, which largely created the warm and stable climate that became the cradle of giants. These ancient forests were not just a collection of trees, but a complex ecosystem teeming with life. Colossal sauropods grazed under the canopy of giant conifers. Their jaws, lined with teeth like simple pegs, were perfectly adapted for plucking tough needles from the branches. Below, on the forest floor, smaller dinosaurs bustled about, picking up fallen leaves and young shoots, finding their niche in this green world. And if you look closely at the fossilized needles, you can see tiny punctures and tunnels, the work of an invisible army of insects, ancient beetles, and sawflies. The fossilized wood and traces of their activity on ancient leaves provide irrefutable evidence. Entire groups of insects, strikingly similar to those we know today, already existed back then. Birds, as we know them, didn't yet exist. But imagine, their predecessors, early feathered dinosaurs, were already moving along the branches. They hadn't yet conquered the skies, but they had already found their home among the trees, leaving behind fossilized footprints and skeletal fragments. These finds tell us that they had firmly established their ecological niche in this forest hierarchy. The landscape of the ancient world was not uniform. Forests appeared differently in different parts of the planet. Near the equator, where the climate was more humid and hot, the familiar conifers and ginkgos were joined by majestic cedars and tree ferns. This created an incredibly dense and multi-layered forest canopy, a true tropical paradise. But at higher latitudes, the landscape changed. Here, conifers and ginkgos dominated, forming dense, almost monolithic forests. These differences in vegetation are like climatic fingerprints, allowing scientists to reconstruct ancient temperature and precipitation patterns from fossil plants. Entire petrified forests have been preserved in the stone records of China and Europe. These aren't just individual tree trunks, but entire ecosystems frozen in time. A cross-section of such petrified wood reveals growth rings that tell a fascinating story. These rings are very wide, indicating an incredibly long and favorable growing season. There are virtually no signs of frost or severe drought. These silent witnesses support the hypothesis that the climate of the Jurassic Period was unusually stable and warm. But these giant trees played more than just climate control. Their powerful roots, like steel cables, held the soil in place, preventing erosion along rivers and in floodplains. When ancient rivers shifted their courses, they buried fallen trunks under layers of silt and sand. This is how they were preserved for millions of years, turning into petrified logs that paleontologists find in riverbed sediments. And in quiet lakes, fallen ginkgo leaves gently sank to the bottom, forming entire carpets. Over time, they fossilized, perfectly preserving their unique fan-shaped form and fine veining. These amazing fossils allow paleobotanists to compare extinct species with their sole living descendant, which miraculously survived to the present day. Ancient forests knew not only the peace, but also the fury of fire. In Jurassic sediments, scientists find fragments of charcoal, direct evidence that forest fires raged here during dry seasons. The very presence of this charcoal speaks volumes. For example, it suggests that atmospheric oxygen levels were high enough to support combustion, although perhaps not as extreme as in some other eras. These fires were not a catastrophe, but part of a natural cycle. Fire cleared the old forest, making room for new growth and supporting biodiversity. Cycles of growth, burning, and subsequent restoration were an integral part of the ecological balance of that time. When conifers and ginkgos shed their leaves, another important process began. Billions of decomposing needles and leaves enriched the soil with organic matter, creating a fertile layer for ferns and other understory plants. Fossilized soils, which scientists call paleosols, have preserved these ancient horizons with traces of roots and charred plant particles. This is clear evidence of the perpetual nutrient cycle that sustained the incredible productivity of the entire ecosystem. The forest canopy, the crowns of giant trees, served more than just a roof. It created a unique microclimate at ground level. In the dense shade of the canopies, there were no sudden temperature fluctuations, and humidity remained consistently high. These were ideal, almost greenhouse-like conditions for mosses and ferns. It's no surprise that their fossilized spores are found in enormous quantities in sediments. Palynologists use these microscopic particles like detectives using clues to reconstruct the local vegetation and climate. These spores, along with pollen from conifers and ginkgo, form an invaluable record of Jurassic plant communities, allowing us to trace how forests conquered entire continents. But forests left their mark not only in stone, but also on the history of the animal kingdom. Imagine a path worn in the mud by a herd of sauropods, and next to it, the imprints of fallen leaves. Such finds, where dinosaur tracks coexist with plant remains, are very common. This is direct evidence of their intimate relationship. The habits of these herbivorous giants literally shaped the landscape. They didn't just eat. By pushing through the thicket, tearing branches, and trampling the undergrowth, they created clearings and glades where sunlight could penetrate. Thus, a feedback system emerged. The animals changed the forest, and the forest provided them with food and shelter, maintaining open spaces within the dense undergrowth. Moreover, forests played a key role in the global water cycle. Rainfall didn't fall with all its force on the ground. It was trapped in the tree canopies, allowing the water to flow slowly, significantly reducing soil erosion. Tree roots, as we've already mentioned, strengthened riverbanks, facilitating the accumulation of those layered deposits of silt and sand that preserve fossils so well. And the vast amount of plant matter buried underground eventually turned into coal. The coal seams found today in Europe, Asia, and South America are nothing more than the preserved energy of the ancient sun, captured millions of years ago by Jurassic forests. The forests of the Jurassic period were truly remarkable and fundamental. They laid the foundation for the ecosystem thriving species were cycads, or sago palms, and the enigmatic bennetites. Cycads are seed plants with powerful, sturdy trunks and spreading crowns of enormous compound leaves, which could be mistaken for palms from a distance. Their leaves were thick and leathery, a remarkable adaptation for withstanding dry seasons. Fossils indicate that cicadas were widespread across the planet, from the northern supercontinent of Laurasia to southern Gondwana. They grew in warm regions and along river valleys, where their drought resistance was particularly valuable. At the tops of their trunks, cones containing seeds matured, most likely dispersed by animals. Traces of insect interaction with these cones are even preserved in stone, suggesting complex ecosystem relationships. Another important group of plants are the bennetites. They resembled cycads in appearance, with the same thick trunks and large leaves. However, their reproductive organs were completely different. Bennetites had complex, cone-like structures that sometimes strikingly resembled flowers, with petal-like parts arranged in a spiral around a central axis. These organs are remarkably preserved in deposits across Europe, Asia, and North America. Paleobotanists speculate that this may have been one of nature's first evolutionary experiments with reproductive forms, which much later would lead to the emergence of true flowering plants. A direct connection has not been proven, but the similarities are striking and continue to be the subject of scientific debate. Thus, the Jurassic forest was multi-layered. Tall conifers and ginkgos formed the upper canopy, while the understory and open spaces were filled with dense stands of cycads and bennetites. Their broad leaves, like giant solar panels, captured the light, creating dense thickets and clearings along riverbanks. These plants served as the main food source for herbivorous dinosaurs. Evidence of this is found in fossilized dung, or caprolites. They contained fragments of these plants' leaves, directly indicating the diet of these giants. Chemical analysis shows that these leaves contained toxic compounds to protect themselves from being eaten. But for enormous dinosaurs, which required tons of food per day, these defense mechanisms were likely not too significant a barrier. Scientists trace the spread of these plants using microscopic pollen and leaf imprints. Research shows that as the single supercontinent Pangea continued to break apart, distinct, unique plant communities began to form on different continents. The world became increasingly diverse. Although cycads remained ubiquitous, bennetites, for example, were particularly abundant in certain areas of Laurasia, where they formed entire plant communities, defining the ancient landscape. We are transported to a world where the history of life on Earth is frozen in stone. Here, in fine-grained lake sediments, like the pages of an ancient book, imprints of leaves and even the delicate reproductive organs of prehistoric plants are preserved. These silent witnesses tell us not only about the flora, but also about the climate of that era. Imagine their leaves. They were true masters of survival, adapted to the merciless sunlight. Many of them possessed a thick, waxy cuticle, a kind of natural armor that deflected the scorching rays. Their stomata, tiny breathing pores, were hidden in recesses to conserve every precious drop of moisture. All this paints a picture of the Jurassic Period, a world bathed in bright light and warmth, but also one that knew evidence of this right in the soil. Around fossilized plants, paleontologists often find carbonate spheres or concretions, geological markers that form exclusively in semi-arid, almost steppe-like conditions. These ancient plants, such as cycads, weren't just passive inhabitants of the landscape. They were its architects. With their powerful root systems, they literally stitched the soil together, preventing erosion. Their trunks, strong and durable, served as the ecosystem's foundation. Even after death, they continued to play their role. Their wood was so dense and resinous that it was virtually impervious to rot. When dying, these giant trunks didn't collapse instantly, but slowly sank to the ground, revealing new, sunlit clearings in the forest thicket where new life could emerge. This eternal cycle of growth, decay, and rebirth created a complex mosaic of numerous shelters and niches. Countless insects, nimble reptiles, and even the smallest dinosaurs found a home in the shadows of fallen giants. Let's take a look at this microcosm. Fossils found alongside plant remains show that the air was already buzzing with life. Ancient beetles, primitive flies, and the ancestors of modern butterflies were already astonishingly diverse. And the first, most ancient alliances were formed between these tiny creatures and giant plants. Imagine an insect carrying pollen grains on its legs from one plant to another. Sometimes, a drop of resin oozing from the trunk of a conifer would fall on such a pollinator, encasing it in an amber tomb for millions of years. These drops of frozen time preserve for us evidence that complex pollination strategies were already emerging in that era, although they were still far from the sophisticated systems that would later develop into flowering plants. The reproductive organs of an extinct group of plants known as the bonnetatales are particularly striking. Some of their fossils reveal structures strikingly reminiscent of the petals of modern flowers. They were complex and highly organized, a kind of first failed attempt by nature to create a flower long before they would truly emerge. Spectacular specimens from Yorkshire and Germany, preserved by a thin layer of sediment, reveal these pseudo-flowers with incredible clarity and detail, right down to the finest veins. By studying them, scientists are trying to understand the paths evolution took before angiosperms took over the world. Unlike conifers, which relied on simple cones and the will of the wind, these plants demonstrated a complexity unbelievable for their time. Their role in the food chain was colossal. They were the green foundation upon which the entire pyramid of life rested. Giant herbivorous dinosaurs, such as the famous Stegosaurus, and smaller ornithopods, fed on their tough, leathery leaves. Studying the fossilized jaws of these dinosaurs, we see that they were ideally adapted for crushing tough plant material, and the abundance of cycads and bennetites provided these giants with a virtually inexhaustible food source. The more widespread these forests became, the more numerous the herds of herbivores became, and in their wake, like shadows, followed the giant predators, for whom these herds were a living larder. This inseparable connection between the plant and animal worlds was the basis of balance in Jurassic ecosystems. But these fossils tell us not only the story of life, but also the story of struggle. On some fossil leaves, we see clear signs of damage left by hungry insects. On others, signs of ancient fungal infections. These marks, these scars on the body of the ancient world, preserve for us fleeting moments of interaction that would otherwise be lost forever. They prove that the ecological environment was dynamic and fraught with danger. As these plants spread across the planet, they left behind chemical traces. When their leaves and stems fell, they enriched the soil with organic matter, and where the dead plants were buried under layers of silt and sand, time and pressure transformed them into coal deposits. Some Jurassic coal seams consist almost entirely of the compressed remains of cycads and benetites. Such deposits are a sure sign that vast swamps and marshes once covered these areas. In places with a drier climate, with periodic droughts and floods, plant material was preserved much less frequently, not having time to turn into coal. Although today, cycads are relatively rare relics found only in a few corners of the planet, their former abundance in the Jurassic speaks to how successful they were in those distant times. Their contemporaries, the Benetitales, however, did not survive the Cretaceous and disappeared forever, leaving us only their enigmatic fossils as evidence of their former glory. These two groups of plants reveal the full diversity of the survival strategies of the gymnosperms that ruled the world long before the first flower appeared. They were the heart of Jurassic forests, performing key ecological functions and supporting the entire incredible ecosystem of life of that era. The fossil record of these plants is so rich and well studied that it allows scientists to literally piece together their anatomy and trace their evolutionary path. Finds of cones, leaf impressions, and pollen grains create a holistic picture of the forests dominated by these bizarre plants. Their contribution to food chains, soil chemistry, and the overall ecological balance was truly enormous. Step by step, we see the evolution of the strange flower-like cones of benetitales, which, together with the crowns of conifers and ginkgos, shaped the very world inhabited by dinosaurs. But beneath the shadow of these giants, another world flourished. Tree ferns and their relatives spread widely during the Jurassic Period, creating dense, almost impenetrable thickets. These were vascular plants that reproduced not by seeds, but by spores. They grew tall trunks crowned with enormous fan-like fronds or branches. This multi-layered structure created the perfect undergrowth, moist, shaded, and teeming with life. Fossils confirm that tree ferns were everywhere. In many Jurassic deposits, we find perfectly preserved imprints of their leaves and sometimes even entire fossilized trunks, retaining their fibrous structure. They were especially abundant along riverbanks, in swamps, and forest clearings, where moisture was always present. Their main advantage was their ability to reproduce by spores. Billions of microscopic spores, light as dust, were picked up by the wind and carried over vast distances. This allowed them to be the first to colonize any disturbed areas of land. These spores mature in specialized clusters called sporangia on the underside of leaves. In some fossil layers, scientists find entire layers composed of these spores. For palynologists, specialists who study ancient pollen and spores, this is a true treasure trove. Spores are much more resistant to decay than other plant tissues and are produced in such incredible quantities that they literally carpet the bottoms of ancient lakes, river deltas, and shallow seas. As a result, spores spores are one of the most common types of microfossils used to reconstruct Jurassic vegetation. Pollen grains from cycads, ginkgos, and conifers are found alongside them, providing an amazingly detailed picture of which plants and in what quantities grew in a given region millions of years ago. Tree ferns played a key role in the Jurassic ecosystem. Their spreading crowns created a unique, humid microclimate that provided shelter for a multitude of small plants and animals. A damp litter of fallen leaves accumulated at their bases, an ideal home for insects, amphibians, and reptiles. Fossil soils, or paleosols, have preserved traces of fern roots, revealing that they grew in groves covering flooded river plains. Their endless cycle of growth and spore release ensured their survival even in areas frequently plagued by floods, forest fires, and even the activity of dinosaurs themselves. The predominance of spores in certain rock layers is a sure sign that the climate was wetter at that time, as spores require water to germinate. Paleobotanists, by studying the number of spores in different geological layers, can trace ancient climatic cycles. During wetter periods, we see a sharp increase in the number of fern spores. In drier periods, pollen from drought-resistant plants, such as conifers and cycads, becomes dominant. This alternation between spores and pollen reflects the great climatic rhythms that shaped ancient ecosystems. Fern reproduction demonstrates a fundamental difference between spore-bearing plants and seed-bearing plants. A seed contains a reserve of nutrients, a kind of startup capital, allowing the young plant to grow rapidly. A spore lacks such a reserve. Instead, it germinates, forming a tiny plantlet that desperately needs a moist environment to survive. This dependence on water explains why tree ferns thrived in the wettest corners of the ancient world. And the fact that we find huge concentrations of their fossils in Jurassic rocks suggests that such humid conditions were widespread at the time. In some regions, paleontologists have found entire layers completely covered in fossilized fern fronds, evidence that they once covered the landscape in a continuous green carpet. These imprints are incredibly delicate and detailed, preserving even the finest veins on the fronds. Fossil evidence confirms another important role for tree ferns. They were on the dinosaur menu. Analysis of coprolites, fossilized excrement, contains fragments of fern tissue. This is irrefutable evidence that these plants were an integral part of the diet of ancient herbivorous dinosaurs. The structural features of their tissue and the jaw shapes of small herbivorous dinosaurs perfectly match, allowing us to confidently conclude that this lush, moist undergrowth was both home and food for them. These small herbivorous dinosaurs apparently preferred a diet of much more tender vegetation, such as the succulent fronds of ferns. Imagine the difference. Instead of trying to chew the tough needles of evergreen trees or the rough leathery leaves of cycads, they plucked soft greenery, which was much easier to crush and digest. For small herbivores, this was an ideal food source. And because ferns grew in abundance, they provided a reliable and constant food base for entire communities of prehistoric animals. But the role of these ancient plants goes far beyond simple sustenance. Their spores, microscopic particles, serve as invaluable clues to the past for paleontologists. Different species of ferns produce unique, easily distinguishable spores. Scientists use them as a kind of biological marker, allowing them to accurately compare rock layers, even those hundreds of kilometers apart. This method is particularly indispensable when analyzing fine-grained sediments at the bottom of ancient lakes or in coal seams, the very places where large fossils like dinosaur bones are extremely rare. Thus, these tiny fossils don't simply prove that ferns grew here millions of years ago. They become a powerful tool for determining the age of geological formations and aligning them into a coherent chronological sequence. Some Jurassic strata can be identified by a distinctive set of spores and pollen, allowing scientists, like detectives, to reconstruct the slow but inexorable changes in the environment over entire eras. What makes these spores such incredible time capsules? Their secret lies in their chemical composition. The spore shell contains unique organic compounds that are extremely resistant to decomposition. This makes them virtually eternal, capable of surviving in sedimentary rocks for hundreds of millions of years. When we examine Jurassic spores under a powerful microscope, a whole world of astonishing detail opens up. Each one possesses unique surface features, complex ridges, sharp spines, or intricate networks. These microscopic patterns serve as a kind of fingerprint, allowing us to identify the parent plant species with astonishing accuracy. This, in turn, makes it possible to reconstruct ancient ecosystems with incredible detail. In rare, truly unique cases, spores become trapped in tree resin. As the resin hardens, it turns into amber, preserving its prehistoric prey in perfect three-dimensional form. Such finds are a real jackpot for scientists. Using cutting-edge scanning technology, they allow scientists to peer inside the spore and study its internal structure without destroying the precious specimen. The science that studies these microscopic fossils, spores, and pollen is called palynology. It's a key method for understanding the Jurassic Period. It allows us not only to compile a list of the plants that grew during those distant times, but also to understand how the plant world changed in response to global climate shifts. For example, if a geological layer contains a huge number of fern spores, this is a sure sign of a humid, rainy climate. Conversely, a predominance of conifer pollen indicates drier, more arid periods. These findings align perfectly with other geological data. For example, the presence of red sedimentary rocks, indicating heat, or coal seams, indicating the existence of giant swamps. The widespread distribution of ferns also highlights the truly global scale of Jurassic ecosystems. Fossilized trunks of giant tree ferns have been found all over the world, in South America, Africa, Asia, and even Antarctica. In regions close to the poles but not yet frozen in perpetual ice, ferns grew seasonally. This is revealed by the growth rings in their fossilized trunks, just like those of modern trees. The very existence of such rich forests suggests that the Jurassic climate was so warm and mild that it supported lush vegetation even in latitudes that are perpetually cold today. Ferns played another vital role in prehistoric ecosystems. They were key players in nutrient cycling. Their fallen leaves, decomposing, quickly released nitrogen and other valuable elements, returning them to the soil. This process fertilized the soil, promoting the growth of other plants and maintaining the overall fertility of the forest floor. In river floodplains, where flooding was common, The rapid growth of ferns helped stabilize the soil. Their root systems, like a network, held together fresh deposits of silt and sand, preventing erosion and strengthening the banks. And this isn't just a theory. The fossil record confirms this function. Layers rich in fern fossils are often found immediately after evidence of natural disasters. Whether layers of volcanic ash or sediments left by a powerful flood, of course, tree ferns weren't alone. They interacted with other plants, creating a complex, multi-layered forest landscape. Mighty conifers and ginkgos formed the upper canopy, providing shade and protection. Ferns reigned low in the understory, adding diversity to the ecosystem and maintaining its delicate balance. Cycads and other similar plants occupied the middle levels, while tree ferns occupied dynamic niches that expanded and contracted depending on humidity and other environmental changes. Their spores provide the most complete and continuous record of plant life during the Jurassic Period, and their leaves and trunks shape the very physical structure of ancient forests. Because their remains are so frequently found in sedimentary rocks, these plants have become one of the primary indicators of the environment during that distant era. The story of tree ferns and their spores is both botanical and geological. It reveals how a primitive method of reproduction via spores could thrive in a world where more advanced seed plants were already beginning to dominate. It also reveals how subtle changes in humidity and complex nutrient cycles supported entire communities. The minute details captured in these microscopic spores offer new insights into our planet's past. Pollen and leaves create a multi-layered picture of Jurassic forests, where a rich carpet of ferns stretched beneath the canopy of giant trees. These plants carry their spores by wind and water across the floodplains of rivers and lakes, leaving silent traces in the rocks that have preserved their history for millions of years. The Jurassic Period is remembered in Earth's history as the era of the Great Rift. It was then that the giant supercontinent Pangea began to slowly but inexorably break apart. At the very beginning of the period, all land was still a single entity, a vast massif, stretching from one pole to the other. But deep within the planet, forces were already brewing that began to tear it into two main parts, Eurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. This massive breakup was caused by the movement of tectonic plates. Imagine, streams of hot mantle rose from deep within the Earth and pressed down on the thick continental crust beneath. The crust thinned, became brittle, and eventually began to crack. This process created giant faults on the surface, rift valleys, which eventually filled with water, solidified lava, and sediment. Geological evidence of this great rifting event survives to this day and provides vivid proof of how our planet formed. We find it in the form of thick layers of basalt, coarse-grained sandstones, and lake sediments that reflect the earliest stages of the birth of a new ocean. The Central Atlantic Igneous Province is one of the most impressive testaments to this process. Its vast basalt fields spread over vast areas are the remnants of one of the largest volcanic eruptions in Earth's history. Although this event began at the end of the Triassic period, its effects were fully felt well into the Jurassic, shaping the chemical composition of the atmosphere and the very structure of the Earth's crust. As rifting continued, sea lanes gradually opened up between the diverse converging land masses. The future Atlantic Ocean began as a chain of narrow, shallow straits. The marine sediments that formed at the bottom of these basins contain exquisitely preserved fossils of marine mollusks called ammonites. Their shells allow geologists to accurately date the formation of these rifts. In some areas, where the sea basins were almost cut off from the open ocean, intense evaporation of water occurred under the hot sun. This led to the accumulation of gigantic salt deposits. Today, these ancient salt deposits can be found along the edges of North America, Africa, and Europe, precisely where ancient rift systems passed. The breakup of Pangea had a colossal impact on the planet's climate when all the continents merged into one. Vast inland areas were far from the oceans, creating extremely arid, desert-like conditions. However, as the continents drifted apart and new seas and straits opened between them, more and more regions came to be located near the coasts. This led to the planet's overall climate becoming wetter and more moderate. This transition from dry to wet conditions is beautifully reflected in plant fossils. In earlier geological layers, we find mostly drought-tolerant species, but in late Jurassic deposits, the picture changes dramatically. A wide range of ferns, conifers, and cycads, which require much more moisture to survive, are now present. This shift clearly demonstrates how tectonic processes and continental movement can directly influence global climate. The climate, in turn, affected the rest of the world. The rifting process was accompanied by powerful volcanic activity, which altered the chemical composition of the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions released enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the air, enhancing the greenhouse effect, which was already strong during the Jurassic Period. The heat trapped by these gases led to increased ocean temperatures, as confirmed by isotopic analysis. At the same time, the weathering of fresh basaltic rocks erupted onto the surface sequestered some of the carbon dioxide, creating a balance. This complex dance between gas emissions and their absorption is part of the long-term carbon cycle that still regulates our planet's climate today. The separation of the continents led to the formation of thousands of kilometers of new coastlines, shallow seas, and isolated marine basins. This created a huge diversity of new habitats. Marine reptiles, such as ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, quickly populated these expanding seas. Ammonites evolved into countless forms, and their shells became crucial index fossils, helping scientists trace the timing and migration routes of ancient species. On land, the fragmentation of the single continent led to the divergent evolution of the fauna of Laurasia and Gondwana. For example, completely different groups of dinosaurs appeared in the north and south. This reflects the fact that migration between the continents became increasingly difficult due to widening sea channels. Finally, the most compelling evidence of continental drift during the Jurassic comes from paleomagnetic data. When lava cools and turns to stone, the iron minerals it contains become magnetized and align with the Earth's magnetic field, like a compass needle. They freeze in this position forever, preserving information about the continent's location at the time of the eruption. This fossil compass is a kind of irrefutable proof of the continent's epic journey across the face of our planet. Let's travel back in time to an era when the very fabric of our planet was in flux. Scientists detectives studying the traces of long-gone events have learned to read the Earth's rock record. Ancient rocks preserve a kind of compass, the orientation of magnetic minerals that reveals the location of a continent when the lava solidified. And this data, collected from around the world, tells us an incredible story. Gigantic land masses, continents, slowly but inexorably crawled across the face of the planet. This picture is confirmed by the distribution of fossil remains. When we see the same dinosaur or plant species found on continents separated today by thousands of kilometers of ocean, the conclusion is obvious. We have irrefutable evidence of continental drift. This process seems incredibly slow, just a few centimeters per year, no faster than our fingernails grow. But on the scale of geological time, over tens of millions of years, this snail's pace becomes a force capable of redrawing the entire map of the world. It changes the contours of oceans and continents beyond recognition. Imagine a narrow crack in the Earth's crust, a rift valley gradually widening. Over millennia, it becomes a gigantic fissure filled with water, creating a new seaway and eventually an entire ocean. Along some edges of the colliding plates, young mountain ranges rise skyward like wrinkles on the planet's brow. Along other passive margins, broad continental shelves form, where sedimentary rocks accumulate over centuries. It is in these thick layers, formed by the breakup of the great supercontinent Pangea, that the most detailed and rich fossil record of that era is preserved. But this global tectonic dance affected more than just land. It also radically altered the world's oceans. As new ocean basins emerged and connected with open seas, the entire water circulation system changed. Global currents, those great rivers of the ocean, shifted their routes. This also altered the salinity of water in different parts of the world. Deep in the ocean, its own dramas unfolded. Oxygen levels fell and then rose. Evidence of this is provided by deposits of so-called black shales, rocks that form in oxygen-free conditions. These dark layers became the perfect sarcophagus, preserving for us in exquisite detail the fossils of fish, plants, and tiny marine organisms. Thanks to them, we can peer into the ecosystem of the Jurassic seas as if through a window in time. The great rifting of the continents also affected the distribution of mineral resources. In those very rift basins where sediments accumulated at an incredible rate, gigantic prehistoric swamps arose. Dense vegetation, dying, fell layer after layer to the seafloor, and over millions of years, under pressure and temperature, this organic material transformed into what we now call coal. Meanwhile, along the new coastlines, in the warm, shallow tropical seas, a different kind of life flourished. Here, carbonate platforms flourished, underwater cities built by living organisms, primarily sponges and corals. They created enormous reef systems, made possible only by the high sea levels and hot climate of the era. Here we see the stunning interplay of three great forces: tectonics, climate, and biology. Nowhere is this more evident than in South America and Africa. Traces of the ancient rift that separated these two continents are visible in the geology of both. Moreover, the geological formations and fossils found on both sides of the Atlantic match up as if we were putting together two pieces of a torn photograph. This is direct evidence that they were once a single whole. The striking similarities in Jurassic ammonites, extinct cephalopods whose shells are found in both Africa and America, America, suggest that at the dawn of the Atlantic Ocean, they were still closely connected. But as the young ocean grew wider and wider, the fauna of these continents began to diverge. The once united animal world began to evolve in isolation, giving rise to unique species. This emergence of so-called provincialism is a direct consequence of geological processes. The split of Pangea was not a sudden cataclysm. It was a slow process, stretching over tens of millions of years, and each stage left its indelible mark on rocks and fossils, like chapters in the great book of Earth's history. By the end of the Jurassic, two successive supercontinents were clearly visible on the world map: Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. They were separated by new oceans and sea straits. In the following Cretaceous period, this process would continue, with the continents drifting further apart, leading to further global changes in climate, ecosystems, and the entire geography of the planet. This is a clear demonstration of how inextricably linked tectonics, crustal movement, and life itself are. This entire grand story of Pangea's breakup has been pieced together by paleontologists and geologists, literally bit by bit. It's the result of a titanic effort, field expeditions to the most remote corners of the planet, complex radiometric dating, and meticulous comparisons of fossil remains. The age of basalts, the solidified lava that flowed in fault zones, is determined using highly precise isotopic methods. It's like looking into a rock's data sheet. And fossils, especially ammonites, serve as markers for scientists, allowing them to accurately date layers and link geological sections across different continents. Each layer of sedimentary rock tells its own story. Here was an ancient rift lake, and there, a shallow, warm sea. Putting all this data together, we get a coherent and compelling picture of a world in motion, where continents are drifting apart and new oceans are being born in their place. Throughout the Jurassic, the great continent of Pangea continued to rip apart. This process opened up new sea routes and radically reshaped coastlines. And these geographic changes led to a profound transformation of the entire planet. Imagine, where for millions of years vast inland deserts had stretched, completely isolated from the ocean's influence, now shallow seas appeared. They penetrated deep into the continents along rift valleys and low coastal plains. These sea bays were not yet the endless oceans we know today. They were more like narrow, warm, and shallow corridors, but they provided ideal conditions for the thriving of marine life. The sediments that formed in these ancient seas hold all the secrets of that era. These include sandstones left over from ancient beaches, mudstones formed in quiet lagoons, and carbonates, the remains of giant reefs. In these rocks, paleontologists find fossils that paint a vivid picture of life at the interface between land and sea. In marine layers, we find ammonites and bivalves, and right next door, in coastal mud deposits, fossilized dinosaur footprints. Just imagine this scene: a giant lizard walking along a muddy shore, and a few hours later, the tide brings in sea creatures. This astonishing juxtaposition highlights how closely intertwined the marine and terrestrial worlds were. The emergence of new coastlines greatly increased their total length. Instead of a single, gigantic coastline on a supercontinent, there were now multiple coastlines on smaller continents. This coastal expansion opportunities for shallow water marine ecosystems. Enormous reefs grew along continental shelves in warm, sunlit waters. Carbonate platforms, built by living organisms, stretched over vast distances. Fossilized reefs from the Jurassic Period are veritable sanctuaries of ancient life, allowing us to appreciate the full biodiversity of that era. Sponges, corals, and algae thrived in these new coastal worlds. Their skeletons and shells, accumulating over millions of years, formed massive limestone formations that we see today as majestic cliffs and mountain ranges. Where rivers flowed into these new seas, carrying tons of sand and silt, gigantic deltas formed. Jurassic deltas were incredibly dynamic systems, transporting sediment from highlands to lowlands. In some places, sandstone and mudstone layers alternate with coal seams, indicating the existence of vast wetlands. These layers contain fossils of plants, invertebrates, and vertebrates, revealing the diversity of ancient habitats, from dense inland forests to brackish coastal lagoons. The shifting coastlines also left behind isolated bodies of water, lagoons and shallow basins, where evaporation was so intense that it exceeded the influx of fresh water. Under these conditions, like a gigantic natural salt pan, thick layers of salt and gypsum accumulated on the seafloor. These deposits, called evaporates, are preserved in the geological record and serve as an important indicator of climate. Their presence suggests that in some regions of the Jurassic Period, the climate was hot and arid enough to trigger such intense evaporation. Today, these ancient salt layers are of not only economic, but also enormous scientific significance, helping us reconstruct the ancient world. Throughout Earth's history, seas have repeatedly advanced and retreated onto land, leaving behind distinctive rock layers that form rhythmic patterns. Geologists study these cycles to understand how and why sea levels have changed. During the Jurassic Period, the primary drivers of this process were tectonic forces and global changes associated with seafloor spreading. At that time, the planet lacked large polar ice sheets, so melting glaciers played a minor role. Instead, sea levels were driven by two other factors: the thermal expansion of seawater itself, and, more importantly, the activity of mid-ocean ridges. As these underwater mountain ranges expanded, they displaced enormous volumes of water, causing sea levels to rise and inundating low-lying areas of the continents. This explains why Jurassic sediments contain so many shallow marine rocks, and why marine fossils are so widely found worldwide. New sea routes connecting previously isolated basins became veritable highways for the migration of marine animals. And here, ammonites come into their own. These extinct squid relatives are an invaluable tool for paleontologists. Their rapid evolution and widespread distribution make them ideal index fossils for dating geological layers across the globe. When the same ammonite species is found, say, in Europe and North America, it's irrefutable evidence that a sea corridor once existed between these continents. Conversely, when ammonite evolutionary lines on different continents begin to diverge, it suggests that communication was lost and the populations became isolated. These data help reconstruct the precise geography of the Jurassic world. The impact of these processes on terrestrial ecosystems was colossal. The opening of new sea routes completely altered atmospheric circulation and precipitation patterns, Imagine, regions that had been arid deserts for centuries became wetter as moisture-bearing ocean winds could now penetrate deep into the continents. In other regions, conversely, the climate became more distinct and seasonal. All these changes are reflected as if in a mirror in plant fossils. In areas adjacent to new coastlines, we see a flourishing of species adapted to humid climates, such as giant tree ferns and horsetails. Meanwhile, in the drier interiors of the continents, hardy cycads and conifers continue to dominate. Before us lies a complex and dynamic mosaic of ancient landscapes, constantly changing under the influence of the great forces that shape our planet. Imagine a prehistoric world where the coastline itself dictated the laws of life, mapping entire climatic zones. It was here, at the boundary between land and ancient ocean, that the most dramatic events unfolded. And the best proof of this are the fossilized dinosaur footprints, forever imprinted in the coastal rocks. They tell us a fascinating story of how ancient dinosaurs adapted to a constantly changing landscape. Let's travel back millions of years to the muddy tidal flats and warm lagoons. Here we see entire trails of tracks left by colossal sauropods and predatory theropods. These prints sit alongside other signs of that era. Wavy patterns left by water in the sand, deep cracks in dried mud, and the burrows of ancient invertebrates. Before us unfolds a picture of an incredibly dynamic environment, moving to the rhythm of the tides. These finds provide irrefutable evidence that dinosaurs were frequent visitors to coastal plains. They wandered through the viscous mud, leaving behind impressions that eventually turned to stone, preserving them for millions of years. But coastal zones preserve more than just traces. The marine sediments formed in these areas sometimes conceal true paleontological treasures. In some isolated basins, where the bottom was practically oxygen-free, decomposition processes slowed to a minimum. This created unique conditions in which even the soft tissues of ancient creatures could be preserved. Scientists call such places preserved lagoons, true windows into Jurassic ecosystems. One of the most striking examples is the famous Solnhofen limestone in Germany. Incredibly fragile and detailed fossils have been found in the thin layers of carbonate silt that once formed the bottom of a shallow lagoon. These include pterosaur skeletons with imprints of their leathery wings, ancient insects, and even the remains of early dinosaurs whose bodies were already covered in primitive feathers. These are some of the most detailed fossils from the Jurassic Period, allowing us to peer into the past with astonishing clarity. However, coastal basins are more than just fossil graveyards. Like a geological record, they record all changes in the Earth's crust and sea level. During those times, the rate of sediment accumulation was colossal. As tectonic faults deepened, they turned into gigantic traps for silt and sand, creating multi-kilometer thick rock layers that took millions of years to form. These layers often alternate. Marine sediments give way to fluvial sediments, and vice versa. This is direct evidence of how the ancient sea sometimes advanced and sometimes retreated, constantly changing the contours of the continents. By studying this layered geological book, scientists can reconstruct entire cycles of crustal movement and sea level fluctuations. This information helps create an incredibly detailed chronology of the Jurassic Period, with each event linked to both local tectonic processes and global climate change. The expansion of coastlines also led to another interesting phenomenon: the emergence of unique regional faunas. Some sea straits remain narrow or shallow, becoming natural barriers to animal migration. As a result, distinct communities of marine life began to form in different regions of the planet: ammonites, bivalves, and even marine reptiles. Over time, these differences became increasingly pronounced. Throughout the Jurassic Period, as the supercontinent Pangea continued to break apart, changes on the coasts and in shallow seas were particularly dramatic. These processes allowed paleontologists to trace the opening and closing of ancient sea routes, literally changing the planet's geography before their eyes. Each new stage of this great rift created new conditions for life and new ecological niches. Fossils found in ancient reefs, river deltas, and lagoons provide direct evidence of this. As a result, the world became increasingly diverse, and life learned to adapt to constantly shifting coastlines. From the perspective of human life, these processes were unimaginably slow, but on the scale of geological time, they were continuous and powerful movements. Their imprints are forever frozen in the rock layers that today stretch across entire continents. By studying them, we understand how closely tectonics, sea levels, and the fate of entire ecosystems were intertwined in the distant Jurassic world. But perhaps nothing in the Jurassic landscape captures the imagination more than these titans of the prehistoric world. The sauropods, long-necked and long-tailed herbivorous giants, they reached sizes unmatched by virtually any other land animal in Earth's history. This grand family includes such famous forms as Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, and Apatosaurus. Each was a living mountain of flesh and bone, perfectly adapted to its own feeding strategy. The fossil remains of these giants reveal their main secret. They grew at an incredible, almost explosive rate. Their bones had a special structure, including so-called fibrolamellar tissue. This type of tissue is directly linked to rapid growth, very similar to that observed in modern birds and mammals. This means that sauropods became colossi, not because they lived for hundreds of years, but because they grew at an accelerated rate. Looking at cross-sections of their fossilized bones under a microscope, paleontologists see something resembling growth rings on a tree trunk. These rings indicate that some sauropods reached sexual maturity in just a few decades. Just imagine gaining tens of tons of weight, the weight of several African elephants, in such a short time. The movement of these colossi is a mystery unto itself, one that scientists are solving by studying both their skeletal anatomy and fossilized footprints. Their limb bones were massive, columnar, capable of supporting enormous weight. The structure of their joints and muscle attachments suggest that their gait was not fast, but measured and incredibly energy efficient. They moved with the inexorability of a glacier. Fossilized footprints confirm this picture. Sauropods often moved in entire herds, leaving behind parallel lines of gigantic prints. The distance between footprints allows us to estimate stride length and speed, which was typically slow, just a few kilometers per hour, like that of a leisurely walking human. On some of these prehistoric roads, we see tracks of juveniles walking alongside a adults, suggesting complex social behavior and herd life. Their feeding strategies were as diverse as they themselves. This is revealed by the shape of their teeth, skulls, and neck anatomy. Diplodocids, for example, had incredibly long whip-like tails and long necks with simple, peg-like teeth. This apparatus was ideal for stripping leaves from branches like a comb. Brachiosaurids, however, were built differently. Their forelimbs were longer than their hind limbs, forcing their necks to always point upward, like the boom of a crane. Their spoon-shaped teeth were designed for browsing the crowns of the tallest trees. These differences indicate that different sauropod species did not compete for food, but wisely divided resources, feeding on different floors of the Jurassic forest. The forests of those times were a veritable paradise for giants, teeming with conifers, ginkgo, and other tall vegetation. It was here that sauropods found the food necessary to sustain their enormous appetites. It is estimated that a single large sauropod could consume hundreds of kilograms of vegetation per day. And this isn't just guesswork. Caprolites, fossilized dung, confirm their diet, preserving fragments of pine needles, pollen, and the spores of ancient ferns. The respiration of these giants was closely linked to their unique anatomy. These colossi had a secret. Their bones were pneumatic, meaning they were riddled with cavities housing air sacs. This suggests their respiratory system was strikingly similar to that of birds. The air sacs connected to the lungs, enabling highly efficient gas exchange while significantly lightening the skeleton, especially the massive neck and ribcage. This adaptation allowed them not only to support their incredibly long necks, but also to maintain a high level of activity despite their colossal size. Now imagine the circulatory system required to support such a body. What a powerful heart it would have required to pump blood to a head raised to the height of a 5-story building. Although soft tissue has not been preserved, biomechanical models show that large sauropods required incredibly strong hearts capable of withstanding colossal blood pressure. Discoveries of fossilized eggs and nests shed even more light on the lives of these giants. Entire clutches of sauropod eggs have been discovered around the world. The eggs themselves were relatively small compared to the size of the adult animal, suggesting that females laid very large numbers of eggs to ensure the survival of at least a few young. Nests were often located in groups, suggesting the existence of communal maternity wards. Apparently, many species simply buried their eggs in sand or soil, relying on the sun's warmth for incubation rather than parental care. The hatchlings were tiny compared to their parents, and analysis of their bones shows that immediately after birth, they began growing at a phenomenal rate. It's a classic survival strategy. Produce a huge number of offspring, knowing that most will die, but the lucky few that survive will quickly reach gigantic proportions. The colossal size of sauropods had a profound impact on their environment. By consuming vegetation at high altitudes, they literally thinned out forests, creating light and space for smaller plants to grow. Their migrations created entire clearings and paths through dense vegetation, and their droppings served as a powerful fertilizer, returning nutrients to the soil and supporting the lush growth of ferns. Thus, Sauropods weren't just inhabitants of their world, they were its architects. True ecosystem engineers shaping landscapes with their mere presence. Fossilized footprints also tell us about their behavior in swampy areas. In some areas, we see deep impressions only from the hind legs. Wow, imagine the fossilized footprint of an ancient giant. We see deep impressions from its hind legs, but the forepaws are barely visible, and in some places they disappear entirely. What does this mean? Could these colossi have spent their lives in the water? It has long been theorized that sauropods, these living mountains, were semi-aquatic creatures that used buoyancy to support their incredible mass. However, their skeleton tells a completely different story. Their powerful columnar limbs were ideally designed for walking on solid ground, not for swimming. Analysis of the bones and footprints paints a different picture. What we see here, most likely, is a herd of sauropods fording a wide river or swamp. They pushed off the bottom with their powerful hind legs, while the front half of their bodies remained submerged. So the aquatic environment was a surmountable obstacle for them, but certainly not their natural home. The remains of these titans are found literally all over the world, and this geographic diversity is a direct reflection of the tectonic drama of our planet. During the Jurassic Period, when sauropods reached their peak, the continents had not yet drifted far apart following the breakup of the supercontinent Pangea. These giants managed to populate North and South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia before the oceans became an insurmountable barrier. But as the continents drifted further and further away, isolated sauropod populations began to evolve in their own ways, giving rise to unique regional species. Their global dominance is the best proof of their incredible ecological success in the warm and humid climate of that era. The Jurassic Period witnessed a veritable explosion of diversity among these giants. Just imagine a prehistoric savanna grazing with several species of these colossi. Some, with graceful and incredibly long necks, reached the crowns of the tallest trees like living cranes, gathering succulent foliage. Meanwhile, other species, stockier and more massive, their necks adapted for browsing at mid-height, might feed nearby. This division of food resources allowed different species of giants to peacefully coexist in the same territory without fierce competition. It's no surprise that paleontologists often find the remains of several sauropod species in the same rock layers, along with the bones of stegosaurs and predatory theropods, which formed complex and dynamic ecosystems. But life wasn't easy for these titans. By studying their bones under a microscope, scientists, like detectives, are uncovering the history of their injuries and illnesses. Here's a healed rib fracture, perhaps the result of a predator attack or a bad fall. Here are signs of a bone infection. These scars of the past reveal that even for the largest animal on the planet, life was a constant struggle for survival. Such discoveries add dramatic details to the picture of their biology. It is believed that their gigantic size was the key to sauropods' evolutionary success. Firstly, it was the ultimate defense. When you're the size of a house, few predators would dare attack you. Secondly, it gave them access to food inaccessible to others, the highest branches. And thirdly, their enormous intestines acted as a gigantic fermentation vat, allowing them to efficiently digest the coarsest plant matter, like tough pine needles and fibrous ferns, extracting maximum energy from them. This strategy was so successful that sauropods thrived for tens of millions of years. The fossil record of these creatures is a fascinating saga, intertwining biology, ecology, and geology. Their bones tell a tale of incredible growth and physiology. Their trackways are a poem of their movements and social life. Nests and eggs are evidence of the mystery of reproduction, and fossilized dung or coprolites reveal the secrets of their diet. Each find, each detail, forms a unified, captivating narrative. We can almost physically sense their long necks towering above forests of ginkgo and araucaria, and the earth trembling as their massive bodies move through river valleys, leaving traces in the mud that, millions of years from now, will tell us their story. But the Jurassic didn't just belong to sauropods. Two other great groups of dinosaurs also dominated this prehistoric stage: the bloodthirsty theropods and the diverse ornithischians. Theropods were bipedal predators, true killing machines. They ranged in size from small, agile hunters to enormous apex predators that stood at the top of the food chain. Their skeletons reveal powerful hind legs, which enable them to reach incredible speeds, and sharp, serrated teeth, perfectly designed for tearing flesh. Famous predators like Allosaurus are prime examples of large theropods of that era. Analysis of their fossils reveals that they were fast and agile, capable of deadly lunges. Their bones contain hollow cavities, an ingenious evolutionary invention that not only reduced the weight of their enormous skeletons, but also formed part of a complex respiratory system similar to that of modern birds. Theropod fossils often bear evidence of brutal battles with other dinosaurs, suggesting intense competition in that ancient world. Bite marks on the bones of sauropods and other herbivores, as well as discovered coprolites full of bone fragments, leave no doubt that they were ruthless and effective hunters. Their bones show that they grew very quickly, which was necessary to support an active, predatory lifestyle. At the other extreme were the ornithischians, or bird-hipped dinosaurs. They were overwhelmingly herbivorous and developed a multitude of amazing adaptations for feeding on plants and defending themselves. Among them, the famous Stegosaurus of the Jurassic Period stand out. Quadrupedal giants with a row of enormous bony plates along their backs and deadly spikes on their tails. Their small, leaf-shaped teeth were adapted for chewing soft vegetation, such as ferns. Fossilized Stegosaurus footprints paint a picture of leisurely, slow-moving animals. Their tail spikes, known as thagomizers, were a formidable weapon. Paleontologists have found bones of predators such as Allosaurus with wounds that perfectly match the shape of these spikes, proving that Stegosaurus were capable of defending themselves. Some scientists also believe that the first ornithopods emerged during the Jurassic Period. These were typically small bipedal herbivores with beak-like jaws ideal for plucking and crushing plants. They were likely very active and moved in herds, as evidenced by numerous tracks leading in the same direction. Their teeth formed complex chewing batteries capable of grinding tough food, marking an important evolutionary step for herbivorous dinosaurs. Thus, theropods and ornithischians represent two completely different yet equally successful survival strategies. Theropods dominated as predators, keeping entire ecosystems at bay and controlling herbivore populations. Ornithischians, in turn, thrived as plant eaters, feeding on the rich flora of the Jurassic Period, from conifers to low-growing ferns. Their fossils are often found in the same locations, suggesting that predators and their prey shared the same floodplains, forests, and coastal zones. Nest finds shed light on their family life. Theropod nests contain eggs neatly arranged in a circle, and sometimes even tiny embryos are preserved within. It is suggested that some small theropods already exhibited behavior similar to brooding in birds. Entire nesting colonies have been discovered in ornithischians, where clusters of eggs were buried in the ground for incubation. Skeletons of young individuals of various ages have been found near such nests, which may indicate parental care and complex social behavior. Theropod anatomy also provides clues to one of the greatest mysteries of evolution, the origin of flight. Amazing fossils of small feathered theropods have been found in late Jurassic deposits in China. Fine volcanic ash preserved not only their bones, but also imprints of primitive feathers. These creatures weren't yet birds, but they were very closely related to their ancestors. Their discovery revealed that feathers originally evolved not for flight, but most likely for thermal insulation or display behavior to attract mates. Large theropods of the Jurassic period, such as Allosaurus, likely lacked feathers, but their very presence in their smaller relatives suggests that feathering may have been far more common than we can judge from the rare finds. Ornithischians, unlike their predatory contemporaries, lacked feathers. Their bodies were protected by armor, bony plates, and spines. The famous Stegosaurus plates are particularly enigmatic. Their true purpose is still the subject of heated debate. Were they protective? Perhaps, but they seem too fragile. Perhaps they were giant radiators. A dense network of blood vessels ran within the plates, which could have helped the animal regulate body temperature by shedding excess heat. Or perhaps they served to intimidate rivals or attract mates, like the bright plumage of modern birds. In any case, the backs of stegosaurs, with their rows of plates, were one of the most striking and memorable features of the Jurassic landscape. Fossil evidence repeatedly hints at a dramatic interaction between theropods and ornithischians. In some places, predator teeth are found mixed with the skeletons of herbivores, mute evidence of hunting or perhaps scavenging. On ancient mudflats, intersecting tracks of a predator and its potential prey can sometimes be seen, a frozen moment of an ancient encounter. But the most direct evidence of their diet comes from caprolites, fossilized excrement. Microscopic examination of these inconspicuous stones reveals a whole new world. Theropod caprolites contain bone fragments, muscle fibers, and tendons of their prey. Meanwhile, ornithischian caprolites are full of plant remains, fern spores, and conifer fragments. These microscopic fossils are direct and irrefutable evidence of who was who in this ancient and brutal world. Analysis of ancient bones reveals a surprising picture of the lives of these creatures. We see that both predatory theropods and herbivorous ornithischians grew steadily, gaining weight and strength year after year. However, their growth rates were nothing compared to the dizzying speed with which the giant sauropods gained mass. Being significantly smaller than their colossal neighbors, these dinosaurs had completely different energy appetites. And it was this feature that pushed them to develop completely different survival strategies. Picture this: a twilight Jurassic forest. A single predator, even the most ferocious, would be powerless against a full-grown sauropod. But what if there were several? The rock record, track marks, tells us that some theropods were social hunters. They acted as a single, well-coordinated unit, like a Mesozoic wolf pack. Moving together, these killing machines could bring down prey many times their size, turning the hunt into a deadly ballet of coordinated fury. Meanwhile, herbivorous ornithischians relied on a different approach. They formed huge herds and relied on their defenses to fend off predators. A glance at the geographical map of the Jurassic world reveals a striking picture. These two great groups of dinosaurs weren't confined to any one corner of the planet. No, they were the true masters of the Earth. Their domain stretched across every continent, from the northern lands of Laurasia to the southern expanses of Gondwana. These ferocious theropods left their traces everywhere. Their bones have been found in North America, Europe, and Africa, demonstrating striking similarities in structure and size, as if nature itself had created the perfect predator and dispersed it across the globe. This suggests that as the supercontinents broke apart, evolution took its own path, creating unique species. But the general formula for success, predator and prey, remained unchanged in every corner of the planet. But the bones hold not only stories of their triumphs, but also the scars of their brutal lives. Each skeleton is a silent witness to battles, disease, and adversity. On the massive skulls of theropods, we see traces of terrible injuries, deep furrows from teeth and claws, healed fractures left behind by fierce fights for territory or mate rights. On the bones of herbivores, we find evidence of disease and infection, stress fractures sustained during a panicked flight from a predator. These are silent tales of deadly combat and the daily hardships faced by every living creature in that harsh era. For paleontologists, the fossils of these dinosaurs are a true key to the past. Their teeth are especially valuable. Theropod teeth, sharp as daggers, are found in deposits all over the world, and by their unique shape, scientists can not only identify the predator's species, but also date the surrounding rocks with astonishing accuracy. Similarly, the bony plates and spines of ornithischians serve as unique time markers. Each such fragment is a page from the great book of Earth's history. Before us unfolds a picture of a perfect ecological balance, honed over millions of years of evolution. Ruthless theropod predators prevented herbivorous ornithischians from overproducing and devouring vegetation. They acted as the caretakers of the ancient world, constantly keeping herds on edge and forcing them to migrate, which in turn affected the landscape. This eternal confrontation between hunter and prey was the engine that sustained life and diversity in Jurassic ecosystems. Their tracks, fossilized remains, and even coprolites, fossilized dung, are all parts of a single, gigantic mosaic that reveals how this world was structured. Now let's lift our gaze from the Earth, where giants rule, and look to the sky. Here, in the boundless ocean of Jurassic air, a different drama unfolds. The sky belongs to the pterosaurs. They weren't birds or dinosaurs. They were the first vertebrates in the history of the planet to conquer the air, true kings of the skies. Their dominance was absolute. Their wings are a marvel of natural engineering. Instead of feathers, they are a thin but strong leathery membrane stretched from the incredibly elongated fourth finger all the way to the body. Fossil footprints have preserved even the smallest details for us. We can see the finest fibers within this membrane, which acted like reinforcement, giving the wing rigidity and allowing it to withstand the colossal forces of flight. The world of Jurassic pterosaurs was astonishing in its diversity. They ranged from tiny sparrow-sized insect hunters to true aerial giants with wingspans of several meters that hunted fish. Their remains are found in unique places, such as the famous limestone quarries in Germany, where fine-grained silt preserves not only bones, but even ghostly impressions of soft tissue, allowing us to see these creatures in all their glory. How did they fly? By studying their skeletons, scientists have come to some astonishing conclusions. A pterosaur's bones were hollow, like those of modern birds, yet incredibly strong thanks to a system of internal struts. Their sternum had a huge protrusion, the keel, to which the powerful muscles that propelled their wings were attached. This proves that they didn't simply glide on currents of air, but were capable of active flapping flight. And the tracks they left behind on ancient beaches revealed another secret. On the ground, they walked on all fours, supporting themselves with both their hind legs and folded wings. This allowed them to perform a powerful push-off jump, soaring into the sky from practically level ground without the need for a running start or jumping off a cliff. Their hunting strategies were as diverse as the pterosaurs themselves. Some species had long tweezers-like jaws with needle-like teeth, perfect for catching slippery fish just below the surface. Fossils confirm their diet. Fish scales and remains of marine mollusks have been found in their stomachs. Other pterosaurs had short, powerful jaws with blunt teeth that worked like a crusher, allowing them to crack the shells of crabs and other invertebrates. And the smallest, most agile species darted through the forest undergrowth like giant dragonflies, snatching insects in mid-flight with their slender jaws. Toward the end of the Jurassic, a new, more advanced group of flying reptiles, the pterodactyloids, emerged. They had shorter tails and a modified hand structure, which likely made their flight even more efficient and maneuverable. For a time, they coexisted alongside their more ancient long-tailed relatives, the rhamphorhynchids, but evolution had already made its choice. A new era in the history of the conquerors of the skies was dawning. Thanks to incredible discoveries in China and Argentina, we can even peer into their nests. Pterosaur eggs weren't hard like those of birds, but had soft, leathery shells like those of modern lizards. The females likely buried them in warm sand or moist soil, trusting nature to incubate them. But the most astonishing thing is the embryos found inside. The tiny, unhatched babies already had fully formed wings. This means the chicks were ready to fly as soon as they hatched. They didn't require extensive parental care. They were independent from the first minutes of life. Their bodies were not covered in scales. Unique fossils show that pterosaur's skin was covered in a dense covering of thin, hair-like filaments, which scientists have dubbed pycnofibers. This fur served as thermal insulation, providing strong evidence that pterosaurs were warm-blooded. Active flight requires enormous energy expenditure, and maintaining a constant body temperature was vital for them. These amazing creatures were everywhere. Their bones are found in ancient lake sediments, river valleys, and seashores. Tracks preserved in damp sand reveal their characteristic quadrupedal gait. We see prints of both hind legs and forepaws, where claws on folded wings are clearly visible. Despite their specialization in the air, they were also confident on land. Modern computer models allow us to recreate their flight. By analyzing wing shape, body mass, and muscle attachments, scientists calculate their speed, maneuverability, and glide ability. The results are astonishing. Pterosaurs were superb flyers, capable of covering vast distances. Their unique anatomy, including a system of air sacs connected to their lungs, made them incredibly efficient in the air, and the flexibility of their skin membrane allowed them to fine-tune their wing shape, performing the most complex pirouettes in the sky. In the rich ecosystems of the Jurassic Period, they were part of a complex food chain. On the coast, they competed with and coexisted with marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, hunting the same fish and ammonites. In the forests, small pterosaurs occupied a niche occupied by bats today, tirelessly consuming insects. That they themselves were prey is confirmed by the discovery of their bones bearing tooth marks from predatory dinosaurs. In this ancient world, everyone was both hunter and prey. Their bones sometimes bear ominous marks. Tooth marks on fossils tell a grim story. These winged lizards occasionally fell prey to predatory theropods or giant crocodilomorphs that lay in wait at the water's edge. Let's move on to ancient lagoons and shallow bays. It was here, in quiet pools of fine-grained silt, that pterosaur remains had a chance of being preserved for millions of years. Their bones were hollow and lightweight, ideal for flight, but also made them extremely fragile. In turbulent rivers or on beaches with large pebbles, their skeletons would simply crumble to dust. This preservation feature poses certain challenges for paleontologists, and our knowledge of them is largely based on their unique geological formations. And yet, despite these difficulties, scientists have managed to discover a staggering number of their fossils. Pterosaur finds have been found across the globe, from the Americas to China, painting a picture of their incredibly widespread distribution. They soared the skies above both ancient Laurasia in the north and southern Gondwana, proving that these rulers of the skies knew no bounds. Their powerful, leathery wings effortlessly carried them across vast sea straits, allowing them to colonize new lands. The importance of pterosaurs to Jurassic science is difficult to overstate. They serve as time markers, key fossils for dating specific geological layers. Imagine a geological calendar, where each page represents a rock layer and the bookmarks represent fossils. Specific genera of pterosaurs existed during strictly defined time periods. Their rapid evolution and diversity make them an invaluable tool for biostratigraphy, the science of dating rocks using fossil remains, on par with such acknowledged clocks of antiquity as ammonites. But their role wasn't limited to posthumous assistance to geologists. They were a living and active part of the ecosystem. Pterosaurs controlled populations of giant insects, and in turn they themselves became a link in the food chain, acting as both predator and prey. Their droppings or guano scarce, but it was an important element in the overall cycle of life during the Jurassic Period. A wondrous vision of the world unfolds before us. The sky, which we are accustomed to seeing empty or filled with birds, millions of years ago belonged to entirely different creatures. Soaring silhouettes unlike either birds or bats, yet honed by evolution to perfection for conquering the air. Their gigantic wings cast shadows on coastal cliffs, prehistoric forests, and tranquil lagoons. We see them gliding above the crowns of coniferous trees and the surface of shallow seas. Thanks to unique fossils trapped in fragile limestone slabs, scientists can peer into their world. We can examine their anatomy in detail, from the delicate membranes on their wings to the pycnofibers, the mysterious fibrous structures that covered their bodies. These stone records allow us to reconstruct, step by step, the mechanics of their flight, their reproductive methods, and their place in ancient ecology. All the evidence points to one thing: pterosaurs were an integral, fundamental part of Jurassic ecosystems. They reigned supreme in the aerial realm, just as giant sauropods dominated the land and marine reptiles the oceans. Their existence is yet another striking testimony to the astonishing diversity of life during that era. It is yet another layer in the complex web of existence where every corner of the planet, every element, was occupied and mastered by amazing creatures. Now let's dive into the depths of the Jurassic oceans. At that time, the seas literally teemed with life, filled with a wide variety of marine reptiles and invertebrates, each occupying its own unique ecological niche. Among them, the ichthyosaurs, Ichthyosauria, shine especially brightly, perhaps the most famous marine reptiles of the era. These creatures were a true triumph of evolutionary adaptation to the aquatic environment. Their streamlined, torpedo-shaped bodies, strikingly reminiscent of modern dolphins, were built for speed. Their enormous, saucer-sized eyes were ideal for hunting in the murky depths where sunlight barely penetrated. Their skeletons speak volumes of their power. A powerful tail with a vertical fin supported by soft tissue and limbs completely transformed into efficient flippers. The fossilized contents of their stomachs leave no doubt about their diet. They were avid hunters of fish and cephalopods such as ammonites and belemnites. But the most astonishing discovery awaited scientists inside the fossilized skeletons. Tiny embryos were preserved there. This is irrefutable proof. Ichthyosaurs were viviparous, giving birth to their young directly in the water. This adaptation forever freed them from the need to return to land, making them entirely marine creatures. Their remains are found all over the world, in Europe, the Americas, and Asia, testifying to their global success. Alongside them, another important group of reptiles, the plesiosaurs, Plesiosauria, roamed the oceans. They were characterized by broad, barrel-shaped bodies, 4 powerful paddle fins, and relatively short tails. Within this group, evolution took 2 distinct paths. The first path is the long-necked plesiosaurs, such as Cryptoclydus. Imagine an underwater serpent with the body of a turtle. Their incredibly long and flexible neck, composed of numerous vertebrae, acted like a fishing rod, allowing them to snatch elusive small fish and invertebrates. The other path is the pliosaurs, short-necked killing machines. Giants like Leopleurodon possessed massive skulls with monstrous bite forces. Their jaws were lined with enormous conical teeth capable of tearing apart the largest prey. Their entire physique screamed speed and power, making them the apex predators of the Jurassic seas. This difference in structure is a striking example of how different species divided resources among themselves, using completely different hunting strategies. Fossil evidence suggests that plesiosaurs, like ichthyosaurs, also practiced viviparity. The unique anatomy of their fins suggests a unique swimming method. All four paddles moved in unison, generating both lift and powerful thrust. This underwater flight provided them with unrivaled maneuverability, allowing them to pursue prey in both shallow water and the open ocean. The presence of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and pliosaurs proves that the Jurassic seas were divided among predators of varying sizes and specializations. These marine giants constantly interacted with the invertebrate world. Ammonites are undoubtedly the most recognizable invertebrates of that era. Their spiraling shells, adorned with intricate suture patterns, are invaluable to science. Ammonites evolved incredibly quickly, with different species clearly corresponding to specific time periods. This made them ideal indicator fossils by which geologists date Jurassic rocks worldwide. Their enormous abundance in marine sediments suggests that they played a key role in food webs, serving as the primary prey for ichthyosaurs and other predators. Their close relatives, belemnites, were squid-like and possessed a bullet-shaped internal skeleton called a rostra. These rostra, composed of durable calcite, fossilize beautifully and are often found in Jurassic rocks. Belemnites were active predators, armed with hooked tentacles and a powerful beak for catching fish and small invertebrates. Like ammonites, they were a vital food source for marine reptiles. Hundreds of tiny hooks from belemnite tentacles are often found in fossilized ichthyosaur stomachs. But the invertebrate world was far richer. Bivalves, such as oysters, formed enormous reef-like aggregations in shallow water. Some of them attached themselves to floating logs, and sometimes entire floating colonies were preserved in the rock. Brachiopods were also a prominent part of the ecosystem. Although they were no longer as numerous as in previous eras, they still thrived in certain conditions. And the seafloor was covered in entire gardens of crinoids, or sea lilies. These creatures anchored themselves to the bottom and used their feathery arms to filter nutrients from the water. All these invertebrates created the very structure of marine ecosystems, forming the basis for more complex life forms. Reef systems were also an integral part of the Jurassic seascape. But when we say reef, we imagine coral gardens. Jurassic reefs were different. They were bizarre underwater cities, built not so much by corals as by giant sponges, layered microbial mats, and calcareous algae. These organisms created massive carbonate mounds that became home to countless communities of invertebrates and fish. Fossil reefs found in Europe and the Middle East reveal complex ecosystems consisting of sponges, corals, mollusks, and echinoderms. The warm greenhouse climate of that era created ideal conditions for their growth. Sea levels were significantly higher, and polar ice caps were virtually absent. These ancient reefs, buried in the deep sea, preserved not only the remains of their builders, but also evidence of entire ecological networks, including the predators and herbivores that lived around them. Jurassic Sea sediments provide a detailed record of climate and environmental change. In some regions, we find layers of black shale, indicating low oxygen levels in the bottom waters. These conditions preserve the most fragile fossils, including fish with the finest scales and even soft tissue imprints. Elsewhere, layers of chalk and limestone accumulated, indicating the colossal productivity of microscopic plankton in surface waters. Modern scientists, by analyzing the isotopic composition of carbon and oxygen in these rocks, can reconstruct the temperature of ancient seawater, its chemical composition, and even study the global carbon cycle. The results of these studies paint a picture of warm and generally oxygen-rich oceans. The climate during the Jurassic was surprisingly stable, without the sharp fluctuations characteristic of earlier or later eras. Fossils of marine life, from giant reptiles to tiny invertebrates, also provide clues to the geography of that time. As the great supercontinent Pangea continued to break apart, the continents slowly drifted apart. The sea routes between them widened, triggering a great process of species separation and the formation of unique faunas in different parts of the world's ocean.